Chapter 193. Iron Bloodline, Bronze Body, Silver Dignity, and Gold Will. These were the divisions that humans came up with. Every rank was actually the result of countless hardships, blood, and tears. The silver and gold species didn't need to make such divisions at all, because they were born above the so-called silver and gold species. In their eyes, dividing power levels so low was no different from dividing ranks for their own children. It was completely unnecessary. For humans, however, each rank represented the fundamental evolution of a warrior. Iron Bloodline, Bronze Body. These names explained everything. At this rank, human mages would construct mana circuits within their bodies, while warriors would discover the potential of their physical bodies. Bronze Body also meant perfect body. This didn't mean that the physical body was also perfect. Rather, at this rank, ordinary people would no longer be able to discover new power from their own physical bodies. In that case, what exactly was Silver Dignity? This was something that was worth discussing. After all, it was completely different from other ranks. Things like dignity were completely incomprehensible. Incomprehensible? At this rank, humans can finally maintain their dignity in front of other species. Only at this rank can we be considered to be on the same level, and only then will it be possible to be compared. If you only look at power level, there isn't even a fundamental difference between silver and bronze. However, there are some things that can be sensed only at that rank. Silver and bronze, the peak of mortals and the beginning of inhumans, may not seem to have much of a difference, but it's actually the difference between heaven and earth. These descriptions were actually quite vague, but for true silver powerhouses, they were as natural as breathing and eating. This was like asking a person how to breathe, how to use their strength, and what tricks they had. Perhaps even if everyone knew how to breathe, they wouldn't be able to explain it. Now that I've reached the silver rank, I finally don't have to worry about being mysteriously killed. For silver powerhouses, life force and mental strength were both solid foundational powers. They could create a warrior's key, a mage's magic ring, which formed an invisible barrier. Their effects were different, but at the very least, they could all defend against external attacks. Silver powerhouses were able to form their own personal domains within their physical bodies, which could defend against unnatural powers. At least I know how I died. At least I can be cannon fodder. At least I can die with some dignity. On a real battlefield, those who aren't silver tier aren't even qualified to be cannon fodder. Under the great magic and profound swordsmanship of a legend, in the soul world of a saint, they are as defenseless as rocks, trees, and other inanimate objects. One thought and one look can kill them on the spot. There's no chance of survival. How can they win? In that era where many races fought each other, a young silver who was regarded as a genius by his own clansmen had a face full of helplessness and self-mockery. And if the opponent is a god, even if it's just a weak god who has just ascended to godhood, I shouted and gathered my will to form an invisible barrier that isolated the purple-gray withering god domain. If I still can't reach the silver rank, I'm afraid that I won't even be able to see my enemies before I die mysteriously in front of all the divine domains. And when I learned that I was about to face a god-level opponent like Cavendish, I unhesitatingly used up all my fate points in order to deal with an opponent with a divine domain. At the very least, I couldn't die mysteriously. And now Cavendish had left. Felix doubtlessly also possessed a true divine domain. From the moment that he descended, his formless yet tangible divine domain had already covered half the city. If anyone used prophecy or detection abilities, they would see that purple-gray smoke everywhere. This wasn't something that Felix had done intentionally. It was a side effect of his divine domain. However, this side effect was fatal to the weak. Cough, cough. The injured people behind me couldn't help but cough up large mouthfuls of blood. That black, filthy blood was only a symptom of their worsening injuries. Mom, I feel so bad. I can't breathe. In a shelter, a yellow-faced girl with dark blue lips begged her mother for help. She wasn't the first to be unable to endure it. Currently, most of the commoners in the shelter were coughing. Those who were sick suddenly got sick, and those who weren't sick suddenly got sick. Infectious diseases began to spread. The withering god domain and the poison god domain were leading them towards death. This was also one of the reasons why true gods were forbidden from descending. True gods, who were the incarnations of certain concepts, were far too frightening. If they existed in the mortal plane, they would naturally distort everything around them. For example, when the god of storm descended, his sky-covering waves would destroy everything. When the sun god descended, his frighteningly high heat would transform the mortal plane into hell. Even the god of law's divine domain would likely create a strange domain where anyone who committed a crime would be punished. Felix was a half-spider, half-elf god of poison. His new divine domain included nature's end, withering poison. In his divine domain, all natural creatures would be affected by his divine domain. Even the god of law's divine domain would likely create a strange domain where anyone who committed a crime would be sentenced to death. This wasn't the destruction of their own will, but the destruction they brought to the world was unavoidable. That was why no matter if it was the order gods or the evil gods of chaos, they would do their best to avoid having their god domain or their true bodies descend. But since Rose's true body had descended, the unspoken rules had long since been broken. In that case, it wouldn't matter if her subordinate Felix violated the rules again. If we don't expel him as soon as possible, we'll all die. Perhaps this new poison god would be punished by the gods in the future, but if we didn't eliminate the god-level existence before us in time, we wouldn't be able to see the future. The only fortunate part was that the gigantic spider god before us wasn't able to control his divine domain very well. His divine domain naturally spread out, but its effects were actually weakened. It wouldn't be able to pose an immediate threat to the warriors who actually faced it. Those who aren't at the silver rank retreat. Take the commoners and retreat as far away from his divine domain as possible. The overall evaluation doesn't count. It has to be the power level of your true body. Even powerful individuals at the silver rank would only be cannon fodder for a few seconds. Just being stared at by this gigantic spider would cause many to vomit blood and die. What surprised even me was that I was in an unexpectedly good condition. It was as if the divine domain didn't have any impression of me at all. This was probably something that even legend rank individuals wouldn't be able to do. The small world created by my physical body was actually able to completely block out the divine domain's influence. This definitely wasn't some simple coincidence. Instead, it was a special ability of my bloodline that specifically targeted me. Host's willpower has exceeded 20, and you've reached the silver rank. You've also been suppressed by the divine domain. All conditions have been met. Congratulations to Host for awakening the racial talent, Chaos Barrier. Chaos Barrier. Protect your own existence from the divine domain and soul world's pressure. Reduce the effectiveness of will type and illusory abilities. Although the explanation was rather simple and vague, it was doubtlessly the most practical ability I had right now. At the very least, with its help, I would be able to calmly observe the overall situation and make arrangements and commands. What? Go up and fight me? Right now, I probably wouldn't even be able to harm him if I didn't use my forbidden technique. That would be no different from suicide. Borealis, cover him with your cannons. In the endless snowy night of tug-of-war, the Borealis, which had lost its vision, was completely useless. However, it still had sufficient ammunition and energy reserve. Under my command, the eager Envy immediately opened fire on all of its cannons. Asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk countless explosions exploded on Felix's body like fireworks. The mage tower's lightning and explosive flames never stopped, and the sound of explosions kept echoing. The battle was quite spectacular. Unfortunately, in front of the astonishing defensive power of a true god's descended body, this product of mortal engineering couldn't even break through its defenses. But it's enough. It's more than enough as cover. Senior Amelia. Aha! With a shout, the green-haired witch transformed into a shooting star that shot upwards. When she suddenly began to fall down, she had an aura even more terrifying than a real meteor. For the gigantic Felix, that was nothing more than a meatball the size of a grain of rice. He didn't need to pay attention to it at all. However, Amelia's sudden heavy punch caused the gigantic beast to scream pitifully and stagger. Judging from the dark green venom that sprayed out from the wound, this punch had pierced through its internal organs. Amelia used her strength to prove that the older, the wiser. Even if her abilities were naturally countered, as a veteran semigod, she still had the ability to fight. The elite warriors of the allied army had already rushed to Spider's side, but they suddenly stopped. There's mucus on the ground. Also, be careful of invisible nets. Those were his final words. Felix, who had suffered such a heavy blow, furiously activated his divine domain at full power. A grayish-black poisonous mist spread, and the warriors not far from him were the first to suffer. Strange tumors suddenly spread throughout their bodies, and they collapsed with their eyes wide open in anger. Seeing how pitiful those warriors were, the ones following behind hesitated. At this point, it wasn't that they were afraid of sacrifice, but that the sacrifice had to be meaningful. Fortunately, a god's interference in the holy war would definitely lead to another god's retaliation. When Felix's god descended, some existences also had a reason to interfere. Our reinforcements finally arrived. A familiar, glorious silver light descended. Womian's will had been observing the battlefield this entire time. When the enemy true god disobeyed the rules and acted rashly, he decided that he had to interfere as well. When that light dissipated, an entire army had appeared where they had originally been. The messy battle flags were nostalgic, and their familiar faces caused exclamations of surprise. Long to Basra. That's the legendary hero Valkyrie. Isn't that General Lolly? She just died on the battlefield 2 days ago, and so did General Basra. How did they come back to life? Idiot, that's Valkyrie. Didn't a true god declare that any warrior who dies in battle for the sake of protecting Valkyrie can become a true Valkyrie? This cruel war caused countless Northland's warriors to fall on this land, but it also allowed the newly born Northland's guardian god to open his own temple of Valkyrie. And now, under Basra's leadership, this newly born Valkyrie army returned to the mortal plane. Spears were thrown like lightning, and the sword-wielding Valkyrie was already beginning to slice apart the spiderwebs. They were still maintaining the advantage, and when Felix was forced to continuously retreat, his 8 eyes shone with a vicious light. Then, that death-inducing divine domain arc exploded once more. But this time, the effects were quite poor. The Valkyrie army actually ignored his threat and took the opportunity to launch a new wave of attack. But just thinking about it for a little longer, it was easy to understand the reason. This could be considered Felix's bad luck. Valkyrie was immortal. He was a condensation of souls and didn't have a physical body of a living creature. Naturally, he wouldn't be mutated or poisoned. This time, Felix had met his natural enemy. At this moment, the most eye-catching person on the battlefield was probably Longtu Basra. Countless weapons suddenly appeared in the air. Precious divine weapons rained down like rain, and magic-patterned scrolls drawn in ancient elven language spread throughout the entire domain. From the very beginning, Basra had been fighting with all his might. In the Battle of the Dragonslayer, through the amplification of Great Judgment, he had briefly reached the edge of a true god and understood this vast power. Now, the elven god system's divine domain and divine spark were right before his eyes, and the master he was loyal to had made it clear that he wouldn't stop him from advancing. How could he not give it his all? The gigantic spears kept stabbing into Felix's body. The Borealis cannons didn't have any gaps, and the witch's sudden attacks were even more deadly. The god of poison, who was constantly receiving new wounds, found himself forced into a corner. But if that was all, it was impossible for the Valkyrie army to deal with a god. Spider's Grey Forest. To Felix, the opponent before him was too difficult to deal with. He was forced to use the ability he had just learned. The concepts of nature, elves, corruption, and wither were all mixed together, and the Spider Prince's nightmare became a demon in reality. In the divine territory, countless strange plants suddenly grew. Those deformed plants were ugly and strange, but soon, these smelly trees and vegetation matured, directly turning into a dense and strange forest. And in the depths of the pitch-black forest, countless giant magical beasts with 8 legs and compound eyes stepped out of their nightmares into reality. They had already begun to step into the battlefield. It was chaos. It wasn't a one-versus-many battle, but a decisive battle between 2 armies. While the red maple defense line was in chaos, on another battlefield not far away, 2 real armies were testing each other out. One side was naturally the Plains Beastmen who had come through the tunnel left behind by Omdoroken. And from the very beginning, the Earth Elemental God, who had communicated with Amont Bloodaxe, had never thought of completely opening up this secret tunnel and letting the Plains Beastmen fight for victory with them. And when the battlefield reached a stalemate, Amont and Omdoroken finally made up their minds and requested for new reinforcements. And the main force on the other side, apart from the demons of the underground world, were mostly elves. But Felix's joy was destined to be for naught, because the elves who came were destined not to be their reinforcements. Apart from the silent underground alliance, there were also more than 30,000 new species of elves. Their grayish-black skin was similar to that of the dark elves. They had once accepted Rose's power of corruption, but their skin color was slightly lighter. Under the leadership of a Banshee princess, they broke free from Rose's control and stood against the dark elves. The underground army, which had a mix of gray elves, and the distant Plains Beastmen. The 2 armies were on guard against each other, but obviously lacked the determination to fight a direct battle. And in the army camp, Swanna's face was filled with worry as she looked at the gigantic spider that was the size of a mountain in the distance. After all, that was her father, the person she had once trusted the most, and the perfect king she respected. The humans, who are naturally weak, are fighting to protect their home. But our elves are still suffering. The army has collectively fallen into the fallen elves, and even the king has turned into a monster. At this point, I'm afraid that it's impossible to turn back. Father, is this the ending you hope for? Is this the pride of the superior elves that you are so proud of? Chapter 194. The accumulated corrosive divine power began to corrode the entire world. As a true god, Felix had stayed in this plane for far too long. The essence of his divine power was beginning to corrode the laws of the plane, turning this entire space into his divine kingdom. Grayish-purple clouds gathered in the sky, and the new snowflakes were actually inky purple. The violent winds in the sky had a slightly sweet fragrance, but anyone who accidentally smelled it would feel dizzy. With Felix as the center, there were no longer any trees or vegetation. All the plants had withered, and the small animals had either died to the ground or mutated into the most frightening man-eating monsters. The battle between humans and true gods continued. Even when faced with the descent of a true god's incarnation, the defending army still didn't give up. They continued to fill in the gaps, or perhaps it should be said that they were stalling for time and struggling at death's door. This was a battle where there was no hope of victory. Or, to put it more bluntly, this was a one-sided massacre. In this increasingly distorted world, the poison had already seeped into every breath. Every moment, someone would suddenly collapse and die. And the brave warriors fighting against this spider on the front lines were rapidly falling to the venom and sharp claws that contained divine power. If it wasn't for the fact that the Valkyrie army, which didn't fear the venom and didn't care about sacrificing themselves, acted as the main force to restrain the spider, and the warships that were constantly firing cannons from afar gave Felix enough trouble, the battle would probably have already collapsed. But this definitely wasn't a solution. The powerful fighters that the northern countries had painstakingly nurtured fell without a single exchange. Even though the Valkyrie army was the main force, many of them were sent back to Womian's Valkyrie palace. Is this the power of a god? It's truly despairing. If such an existence appeared in the Ottoman Empire, on a high platform far away from the battlefield, the worried hermit could only shake his head helplessly as he put down his binoculars. At first, the Ottoman Empire had sent him and a squadron of White Wolf Guards as a volunteer army to provide support. Originally, they were only there to transport supplies and gather information about the north. Dasos's ambition had never been extinguished. But nobody expected that the Beastman's ambush, which seemed to happen every few days in history, would turn into such a cruel battlefield. Is this the Holy War? Everyone's eyes were completely bloodshot. Legendary heroes and true gods that were rarely seen in the past had appeared, and the silver and gold fighters that the various countries viewed as treasures were actually nothing more than pawns on the battlefield. Oh, another dozen have fallen. It'll take us at least 10 years to train a silver fighter that doesn't rely on equipment. Hemmet's sigh came from the bottom of his heart. The fact that the war had escalated to such an extent had undoubtedly exceeded everyone's expectations. Up until now, in order to fight for the benefits and living space of their race, the Northerners, Elves, and Beastmen had all entered the battlefield. All the Northerners had given their all. In the short span of 2 months, the number of undying existences that had fallen was not small. Let alone the elemental gods, even a true god had fallen. Just the ascension of a new god would be a huge news that would shock the entire world. Apart from the war on the surface, the elemental gods and the residents of the underground world were also secretly participating in the war. Countless weapons of war were bound to change this generation. Now, even the true gods disregarded their reputation and directly participated in the war. Perhaps nobody would dare to say that the war in the north was petty anymore. If the Holy War is a battlefield of such intensity, I'm afraid that even the super empires won't be able to hold on for long. Looks like I'll have to discuss this with His Majesty and the Empress when I return. I'll have to be lucky enough to survive this calamity first. Shaking his head, he dispelled the unnecessary thoughts. Then, he handed a magic crystal with sufficient information to the Griffin Knight who had been waiting for a long time. Give this to His Majesty Dasos. Then what about you? You don't intend to leave? It's better that you leave with me. The Griffin Knight's doubts weren't unfounded. If Red Maple City fell, the Beastmen and the Poison God wouldn't let Hermit off just because he was an Ottoman. But now, Hermit shook his head. I intend to see this war to the end. It's worth exchanging my life for first-hand information. And I still don't think that the humans will lose. The Griffin Knight soared through the sky and flew towards the south. When a feather fell from the sky and landed on Hermit's hand, he heard slightly heavy footsteps behind him. As for Hermit, he already knew who it was that had arrived. You want to fight? You've seen it for yourself. In a battle of this level, you're just cannon fodder. There was only silence behind him. There was no reply. But it showed the determination of the White Wolf Knight. Even if they were only a guest army, they were unwilling to watch their own kind die in battle and the civilians be slaughtered without doing anything. As a knight, they were unwilling to do anything. Only cannon fodder? They weren't newbies who had just entered the battlefield. How could they not know the difference in strength? But, even if they knew that there were thorns in front of them, the knight's face was still filled with determination. Their eyes were firm and their arms were firmly gripping their weapons. Naturally, what Amont had promised the Beastmen of the Plains was to allow both sides to simultaneously fight against the humans and divide up the other's territory. Of course, even if the beastmen won in the end, how much they would get would depend on the difference in power between the beastmen and the humans. Right now, wasting precious resources on a random enemy in a random location wasn't worth it at all. That's a bird? A dragon knight? No. That's Superman. Oh no, that's just a naked muscular man who's only wearing his underwear on the outside. Ugh. So disgusting. Soon, Corodian didn't need to hesitate any longer. A gigantic shadow descended from the sky and landed right in between the two armies. Boom. Corodian suddenly stabbed himself into the ground and instantly made a pose like he was contemplating something. When everyone looked at him, he suddenly raised his arms, bent his elbows, and punched the air. He made a pose that showed off his muscles by flexing his bicep. Then, he smiled. Love and peace. Please stop. This world is so beautiful. We don't need to fight. Make love and no war. We need to love each other and not fight. Corodian's pearly white teeth were reflecting the light. He smiled brightly and spoke louder and louder. By the end, he was actually singing. What made people feel uncomfortable was that he was clearly a muscular monster, but he had a handsome face that was so beautiful that it could be found in a shoujo manga. His face was also filled with bashfulness. Such a sharp contrast made him seem even more incongruous. Kill that pervert for me. All right then, Corodian unhesitatingly shouted out what everyone else was thinking. His subordinates executed his order as fast as they could. Not only were the beastmen impulsive, even Anne and Swanna had the urge to order people to shoot arrows at Corodian. But unfortunately, all the arrows fell to the ground before they could even reach Corodian, as if there was an invisible barrier around him. Oh my, you're such a naughty child. In that case, allow me, Omar, to teach you what love is. Corodian flexed his latissimus dorsi, biceps, and tricep. Corodian's body and mind were glowing as he performed all these beautiful poses that would make anyone want to vomit. The next instant, an innumerable undead army appeared out of thin air. My heart is filled with my people. As the king, my foothold is our country. I love my undead, and they love me. This is my ultimate love. Corodian threw an extravagant flying kiss at the skeletons as he kept winking at them. The brainless skeletons that he controlled actually made a shy pose together, while the pitiful intelligent undead, for the first time, and learned that even undead could be disgusted to the point of vomiting on the ground. However, power was the best way to pass the test. Even though Corodian was obviously a pervert, the dense undead army caused the excited beastmen to retreat. Are you Lord Omar? Bones. Roland probably can't hold on for much longer. Please hurry and help him. Oh, so you're the red-haired little Anne? Little Lionheart told me about you before. You're just like in the information. You're really cute. Do you want to debut together with me and become an idol star? I've recently made up many new beautiful dance moves and songs. If we become a dance group, we'll definitely shock the entire world. Shock the entire world. Alright then, at least Anya knew that Corodian was a big shot. At the very least, she kept her complaints to a whisper. Why is it even more ridiculous than what I've heard? I've never heard of such problems. But the next moment, Omar's reply allowed everyone to understand. Relax, father has already sent reinforcements. He's such an interesting person. I've learned so much about his understanding of love. I'm ashamed of my inferiority. As the black dot in the distance grew larger and larger, I sensed the truth. My eyebrows kept twitching. Of course, having reinforcements was a good thing, but if the reinforcements were that, I felt that it would be better to fight alone. That's a bird? A dragon knight? No. That's Superman. Oh no, that's a bayphone. Hurry and dodge. In my field of vision, the black dot grew larger and larger. Then, it suddenly crashed into the ground, destroying a small building and creating an empty space. What's the matter? Is he dead? The exclamations from the side were obviously from outsiders who weren't familiar with Corodian. After all, no, even if the world of Aichi is destroyed, that guy won't die. How could anyone who was familiar with Corodian not know about his undying gentleman body? I almost died. As expected, the next moment, Corodian poked his head out from the rubble. He had an expression of being lucky to have survived, but I knew that he only had himself to blame. Bastard Draken! The next time you casually tear off my scales and touch everything, I'll throw you into a volcano. Above the clouds there was an angry roar. That was a thunderous storm. Next, a purple magic dragon descended from the clouds. After landing, it transformed into human form and glared fiercely at the legend-ranked hunter who was trying his best to avoid talking about something else. Thunder Dragon? Is that your animal companion? I heard that Beifong used his dragon's bloodline to form an alliance with a thunder dragon. Only a thunder dragon, which was famed for its speed even among dragons, would be able to bring Beifong here from Antoon in a single night. It would be nice if you could come, but it would be useless even if you came. Why don't you have Adam come here? I wasn't underestimating him. His opponent was the poison god Felix. A legend-ranked hunter and a young dragon wouldn't be able to make much difference in terms of power. It would be better to have that dragon bring Adam here. But then, I heard a familiar silly chuckle. Heh, I didn't expect you to trust me so much. I looked behind me. Wasn't that the perfect meat shield, Adam? He was currently completely naked and covered in all sorts of magic runes. As it turned out, the moment the thunder dragon landed, it unfurled a gigantic magic carpet on its back. All sorts of magic runes and magic arrays had already been drawn on it. When this simple magic array resonated with Antoon's magic array, Marguerite was able to use the remaining magic materials to teleport again. The target of the teleportation was naturally the currently smiling Adam. Wonderful! I laughed in delight as I kicked Adam away. Be my meat shield. I need around 15 minutes of absolute safety. Alright then, let's not talk about how that naked man walked onto the battlefield with a displeased expression. With a top-level meat shield here, the pressure on the other warriors was greatly reduced, and I now had a chance to do something. Heloise had only pointed out Felix's stats, and he had already treated me with great importance. It was likely that there was nothing in the divine domain that could escape Felix's attention. Without his protection, I wouldn't be able to do anything great. Now that I had a meat shield, I could finally use my trump card. Chant the forbidden spell Ice Aeon? First of all, that would definitely be a major spell that couldn't be completed in an hour or two, and first of all, I wouldn't be able to cast such a forbidden spell even if I burned my life force. Not to mention the severe consequences of casting such a forbidden spell, I felt that even a large-scale forbidden spell probably wouldn't be able to kill him. Also, I felt that the moment I started chanting the incantation, the earth-shaking magical waves would be like begging Felix to kill me at all costs. In the past, I had the protection of an undead army, but now I didn't have that ability. If my opponent was an endless horde of beastmen, I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. But if my opponent was a true god, then I really did have a trump card that wasn't really a trump card. It was a trump card that would definitely break the rules and bring me endless trouble, but it was also a trump card that I had specially prepared for such situations. And it was because of this trump card that I dared to face Cavendish by myself. After all, so many years had passed, and it was entirely possible that Cavendish would turn on me. If I didn't have the ability to protect myself, how could I possibly appear in front of him? And it was precisely because of Cavendish's easygoing attitude that I had kept this trump card until now. And now, since Felix had completely broken the rules, I naturally didn't have to worry about attracting trouble with my trump card that was above all the rules. And just as I expected, the moment I started preparing to cast the spell, a rain of venom shot towards me. I didn't even look at it as I focused on my preparations. After all, I trusted that someone would block this trouble for me. Ah, my underwear! It's over, I'm so embarrassed. As expected, Adam blocked the venom for me. However, the corrosive poison gas attack caused his remaining piece of clothing to be destroyed, leaving him completely naked. Pause. Wait for me to change my pants. Hey, I already said pause. Why aren't you following the rules? Lady, can I borrow your skirt for a moment? Hey, don't run. I'm really not a pervert. I just saw that you weren't wearing much, so it seemed more convenient for you to take it off. Pervert. Alright then, let's ignore the fact that he had actually tried to borrow a female mage's robe, only to be slapped in the face instead. Still, the fact that he was here gave me enough time to be safe. And so, I made up my mind and used this trump card. God's Descent. Chapter 195. The battle before us had fallen into a hopeless predicament. Even if the warriors weren't afraid of sacrificing themselves, if Felix was so impenetrable that it was difficult to even break through his defenses, this was naturally an unwinnable battle. Naturally, everyone became discouraged. All below the true god level are Ant. Elf main god Anslo Schusta Adelban. Even though I never agreed with such arrogant words, I had to admit that the most troublesome aspects of undying existences like gods were their undying nature and vast divine domains. This was a clear example. No matter how hard any mortal tried, they would be unable to deal any truly life-threatening damage to Felix. Even if they did manage to do something, Felix would recover in the next second after expending some of his power. What ants? It's just that the quality of divine power is too high. Mortals are unable to deal any life-threatening damage. Still, it's not like there's no other way. God's Descent. That's right, my method was God's Descent. This was the trump card I had left behind when I ascended to become a god, as well as my trump card to deal with those old fellows who might come looking for trouble with me. True gods were undefeatable? Even though this was considered the natural law of the world, I had never believed it to be so. However, divine power was a unique type of power that was almost a concept, and it was indeed difficult to deal with. And in order to achieve my goal in this holy war, I would have to deal with true gods sooner or later. And the simplest way to deal with them would be to have divine power as well. This was also the foundational reason why I spent so much effort to create a true god that I could trust. The conditions for God's Descent? In terms of souls and physical compatibility, Womians and I were second to none. We were the same person to begin with, so all the rituals could be skipped. If the Moon Elves were able to reach a compatibility rate of over 60% to complete their God's Descent, Cavendish would have a compatibility rate of over 80% with Rene, which meant that Womians and I would have a compatibility rate of 100% from the very start. The Moon Elves would need to change their soul wavelengths in order to complete their God's Descent ritual, but for me, I only needed to form a connection with my clone in the sky. Of course, having too high a compatibility rate wasn't necessarily a good thing. Having identical souls would cause another problem, but now wasn't the time to worry about that. As the two wills and souls of the same origin drew closer to each other through the link, a silver light so vast that it was impossible to look at it directly descended. A silver scale appeared in midair, and the Nephilic judge's silver mask materialized. The silver celestial domain and the grayish-purple celestial domain directly collided. Through my physical body, the guardian god of law and the Northlands, Womians, has descended. Is this the feeling of a god? Everything in the surroundings was crystal clear. Even the distant hermit, who was so scared that he dropped his binoculars, had a vivid expression. And in the eyes of a god, all illusions were meaningless. The truth of the soul could be seen clearly. I could sense the endless power of faith flowing through the heavens pillar to the various divine domains. In the Northlands, most of the power of faith was connected to me. As the guardian god of the Northlands, countless believers made me stronger. It's not a good thing to be powerful right now. I don't have much time left, so I need to hurry up. A physical body could only have one soul. When two souls entered the same physical body, even if there were special methods to make it so that only one soul could be used. The moment they descended for too long, they would instinctively try to devour and oppress each other. However, this wasn't a problem for me. Womian's was a clone that had no sense of self to begin with. The fusion of two completely identical souls was like two files with identical data stacked on top of each other. No matter how they were stacked, they were still the same file. But my problem was not in this aspect. Damn it, the fusion has begun as expected. That's right, my problem wasn't how to perform a perfect god's descent, but rather how to separate after the god's descent. If an ordinary god's descent was the equivalent of mixing water and oil, then they would work hard on how to fuse two completely different existences into one in order to increase the fusion rate. My god's descent was the equivalent of mixing water and water. The biggest problem was that it would be difficult to separate after the fusion. But right now I had already achieved my first strategic goal. Countless secrets and knowledge were pouring into my mind, and a tremendous amount of divine power was pouring into my body. Although I had taken many detours, I had finally stolen the knowledge and wisdom of a true God. The secrets of divinity, the composition of the power of faith, the cycle of reincarnation, the Valkyrie Palace. It's all worth it. There were some things that could only be seen clearly after reaching a certain height. I had been looking forward to the mysteries of the gods for a long time. Only with this would it be possible for the next step of my plan to be realized, and my future path of development would also become clearer. I've finally taken another step forward. With these, I'll be able to fully increase my personal combat strength. But now wasn't the time to be happy. My will was already beginning to become hazy. Womian's, who was a vast ocean, was currently fusing with me, who was a small stream. If this fusion continued, we would likely never be able to separate. No matter if Womian's is pulled down or I'm pulled up, neither is an acceptable ending. This means that all of my efforts for so long will have been for nothing. Although there were many thoughts and thoughts, everything actually happened in the blink of an eye. In the eyes of the spectators, they only saw Roland floating in midair with a silver crown appearing on his forehead. His tremendous divine power transformed into a physical divine domain. The silver divine domain and the grayish-purple divine domain clashed, corroding and pressing against each other. The two descended gods immediately clashed, using the most barbaric method to compare their power levels. Perhaps it was because Roland, who was a vessel, was far stronger than Adrian, or perhaps it was because Womian's, who had two divine domains, was stronger than the god of poison, or perhaps it was because Felix, who had just ascended to godhood, was far from being a true god. The result of their clash was obvious. Silver had an overwhelming victory. Battle of Gods. This battle that would decide who would become the ruler of the Northlands had finally reached its final stage. The gods were beginning to directly interfere in the battle. Although I seemed quite impressive right now, I actually had a splitting headache, my mind was hazy, and I was about to fall asleep. But I knew that if I fell asleep now, I probably wouldn't be able to ever wake up again. Shadow. With a low roar, an illusory shadow came to life. It attached itself to my body, and began greedily devouring divine power to grow. This was the power that I had obtained in the snowy mountain. Frigid Maw, which had been unable to hatch for a long time, finally transformed into a shadow of ice. Right now, it was a newborn that was extremely lacking in nutrient. Divine power, which was of the same origin, was the best nourishment for it. Why was it of the same origin? Womian's divine power was of the same origin as mine. This frigid maw was my companion species, which was also of the same origin as me. The end result was that Frigid Maw and Womian's were also of the same origin. Frigid Maw would grow together with its host. It would absorb its host's emotions and gradually evolve. And this newborn Frigid Maw called Shadow had already absorbed more than 300 years of my negative emotions. Perhaps the craziness and warping in a desperate situation had created its frightening power. Even though it had just hatched, it was already able to easily toy with and even kill Fommel. If it absorbed enough divine power to make up for its innate deficiency caused by being unable to hatch for so long, it would be unimaginable how strong it would become. It was definitely worth looking forward to. Under the nourishment of the silver divine power, the black shadow began to change color. The silver shadow began to become more and more tangible. Under the accumulation of coincidences, a brand new type of divine power was being born. From afar, Shadow was nothing more than Womian's wings of light after his god's descent. Those feathers of light that filled the sky were exceptionally beautiful. The silver wings of light continued to spread out, and a silver-white cape covered the face of the god. Womian's silver mask descended into the mortal realm. Countless one-eyed emblems opened in midair. His gaze was everywhere as he examined the entire world. Actually, this special equipment was the form that Shadow had chosen to transform into. Right now, as the other half of his body, he was helping me to carry a portion of the divine power. This also allowed me to finally relax a bit and spare some energy to control this inconceivably powerful divine power. Target locked on, Felix. Divine art, great judgment. A silver light had already enveloped this world. The god of law with wings of light spread out his arms, summoning a nameless thick codex in front of him. Judgment. The silver-white gavel caused countless waves as the masked and robed judge began to examine the sinner before him. In the god of law's divine domain, no crime could escape his eyes. At this moment, under the gaze of the eye of justice, countless crimes appeared before him. The codex kept flipping to the page labeled with the crimes and punishments. In front of the original codex and the god of law, no existence could be exempted, even if he was also a god. You have sinned. The silver divine domain began to expand. Since these beastmen were here as well, how could I possibly let them go? Since they were still waiting at the scene of their crimes to share in the spoils of their crimes, I was going to judge them all together. Hiss. Unfortunately, the spider god's screams tore apart the expanded divine domain. Its struggles took up most of my energy, and caused me to lose the possibility of dealing with this trouble once and for all. Silence. The divine domain suddenly contracted, and silver chains bound the gigantic spider god. Biting off more than I could chew, I focused all of my divine power and attention on the opponent before me. Divine law, the first of the 13 sins. Those who willfully take the lives of others for their own selfish desires shall receive the god of law's harsh judgment. Even after death, they shall be punished by mountains of swords and seas of fire. Divine law, from the very start, didn't have any restrictions on who it could be used on. It was a law created by the god of law, but it was also his teachings, as well as the reason for the god of law's existence. Yes, from the very start, divine law didn't have any restrictions on who I could judge. I had intended to judge the gods from the very start. Judge the gods? Have you gone mad? This was Ael's astonishment at the time. No, it's this world that's gone mad. This was my reply. Let me, this lunatic, let you arrogant idiots, let you bastards who treat the hard lives of ordinary people as entertainment, let you know what the dignity of mortals is. If I don't drag you bastards to the bench of judgment, how could this damned war ever end? Divine law, carry out judgment. Silver chains materialized and dragged the spider god down to the mortal plane. A dark purple divine soul began to merge into his body. This judgment was directly targeted at a true god's true body. The silver cross transformed into a sharp blade, and the light of law transformed into a boiling sea of magma. In between illusion and reality, the spider god was currently being tortured. And this was only the beginning. Divine law, the 7th of the 13 sins. Those who willfully take bribes for their own selfish desires, break the law, and neglect their duties shall be stripped of all their positions and demoted to a commoner. Felix, thou wantonly descended to the mortal plane, causing slaughter and war. Countless lives have died because of you, and the river Styx is filled with vengeful spirits. Even though he was being tortured by mountains of swords and seas of fire, the enraged spider god was still doing his best to struggle, attempting to break free from his restraints. He had a premonition that his end was right in front of him. Thou art not fit to be a god. I hereby declare that the poison god Felix shall be demoted to a commoner. The complete suppression of the divine domain allowed the great judgment spell to take effect. From that moment onwards, Felix lost his divine domain. No matter how much power he had left, he was nothing more than a gigantic savage beast, not a venerated true god. I knew that once the divine domain disappeared, Felix would return to his status as a god. I was still far from having the power to truly judge the gods, so this kind of deprivation wouldn't last long. But it was enough. A bright white thunderbolt first struck Felix's head, causing him to scream out in pain. As my most trusted partner, how could Adam possibly miss out on such a good opportunity? His large wound didn't instantly heal like before. Without his divine domain, divine power, and indestructibility, Felix was nothing more than a slightly larger and more difficult beast to deal with. Hurry! Don't waste the opportunity that Lord Womian's created. White Wolf, victory! Silver Cross charge! Don't let those Southerners steal the glory of slaying a god. That's ours. Black Eye Legion, grit your teeth and stop. Is there anyone else in the Rhodes Royal Guards? Damn it, even if I'm the only one left, I'm still going. I can't let anyone look down on me. The cannons that had overheated to the point of being useless were ignited once more. The heavily injured knight began his final charge, and among the exhausted army, the 4 elemental swordcasters were the most eye-catching as they replenished their mana through the Borealis. The other warriors had already used up all their mana in the long and drawn-out battle, but the swordcasters, who were born for the battlefield in this new generation, had already replenished their mana through the Borealis. They were currently tossing out fireballs and lightning arrows, using the most basic elemental power to create irreparable wounds on a true god, bringing him to the brink of death. It's still not enough. There's no time. But from what I could sense, this still wasn't enough. Felix still hadn't received any fatal injuries, but I was already at my limit. Chaotic memories that I had already lost filled my head, and the increasingly heavy dizziness made me want to just sleep. But, is there really no other way? It was so difficult for me to reach this step. Am I going to fail just like this? I can't accept this. Our souls were beginning to resonate and merge again. If I didn't cancel the god's descent soon, I probably wouldn't be able to do so anymore. I wanted to grit my teeth and persist, but my increasingly hazy consciousness made persisting meaningless. Just sleep here. Why must you be so persistent? No. Then, cancel the god's descent. Your soul is currently melting, you absolutely can't. Who am I? Womians? Roland? Black Hand? Rollo? Tempting words were stealing away my consciousness, and Felix's struggling divine power was making everything worse. My chaotic memories caused my consciousness to become chaotic, and I was already at my limits, but, Aurora Knight Squadron, return. Let these invaders know the wrath of the people of the mist. Long live the will of the mist. We've returned. The familiar battle cry startled me. Weren't those my Royal Knight Squadron coming over from the horizon? They had finally caught up. The Mist Kingdom's Royal Knight Squadron, 54 Aurora Knight Squadron, are all here to pay our respects to His Highness Roland. Your Highness, we've returned. Ah, my Knight Squadron, I knew that you wouldn't disappoint me. After all, no matter if it was 378 years ago or 252 years ago, you still wouldn't disappoint me. No matter if it was 132 years ago or 1 year ago, you still wouldn't disappoint me. The Donlon Principality, the Aurora Knight Squadron, 174 Aurora Knight Squadron, are all here to pay our respects to His Highness Roland. We pay our respects to His Highness Roland. Your Highness, leave the rest to us." This group of youngsters from the new generation followed their teacher and circled around in front of me. Then, they suddenly pressed down on their iron helmets and charged towards that gigantic divine power beast while laughing maniacally. "Brat, well done." The first king of the mist, frigid Maw Lion King who rarely praised me, suddenly transformed into a gigantic lion statue and pounced towards Felix. But he was destined to fail. Ah Dang is here. Ah Dang will beat up whoever dares to bully Ah Pa. If it wasn't for that familiar voice, nobody would have associated that gigantic Storm Titan giant with an abomination. The Storm Titan giant that suddenly descended smashed Felix into the ground, while the gigantic bone dragon that suddenly dived down screeched and shot out its breath of death. This was a rare sight. On the ground, the Undead Knight and the Holy Knight were charging together, while the Dragon Knight was actually on the same side as the Bone Dragon. The Corpse Eater King was actually raising the human's sacred sword. Unknowingly, I seemed to have gotten one step closer to the ideal land in my dreams. I had already lost control of my hazy consciousness, but I firmly held onto the shackles. That wild beast had already fallen into the cage. "Felix, you want to escape? Stop dreaming. Let's first pay some interest for the blood shed on this land. After that, I will ask Lorcy for the principal." Chapter 196. An ancient legend reappeared at this moment. Even an undying true god would one day fall. However, the chains that represented heaven's punishment pulled Felix down from his divine throne. Without the status of a true god, and without the divine power that allowed him to regenerate limitlessly, he finally began to panic. Ever since he had ascended to the divine throne, he had never considered the possibility of failure. To him, war was nothing more than a game, and mortals were nothing more than pawns in this game. But now, this game was going to take his life. Panic finally appeared in his 8 eyes. He finally felt fear and despair, which was something he had always brought to mortals. Finally, he wanted to escape. But it was too late. The 7 deadly sins had arrived. Damned gods, did we, the people of the mist, ever offend you? Are you done yet? Is it so hard to live a peaceful life? The furious Bastion tore off Felix's leg in one bite, causing blackish-purple poisonous blood to splatter everywhere. The gigantic 3-headed hellhound had already become even larger than the spider god. 2 of its heads were constantly creating new windows, while the last head roared in anger and spat out an aura of death. Without a doubt, he was venting his anger, but there was nothing wrong with his questioning. In fact, some warriors were also questioning the ugly spider god. Why is it us again? Why can't we just peacefully live in this land? This species of the Northlands had already suffered far too much. The people living here also wanted to ask why the flames of war had once again been ignited in their homeland. Was simply wanting to live peacefully such an extravagant hope? But Felix didn't answer. Nor was he able to answer. Ah Dang hates spiders. The Titan giant with a low, muffled voice transformed into a gigantic 8-tailed octopus. Its soft yet tough limbs wrapped around the ferocious behemoth, and it used a technique that normal people wouldn't be able to learn to lock down Felix's ability to resist. Its thickest limb transformed into a heavy cylindrical hammer that constantly whipped Felix's head. For Ah Dang, things like truth and justice had never been important. Peace, which made people dull, was also meaningless. But there was one thing that he absolutely couldn't tolerate. If someone bullied his family, he would give it his all and viciously beat them up. Lock down the limb joints. Launch the half-tank ammunition. This time, when the cannons and smoke covered the sky, although Felix's outstanding defense allowed him to ignore the cannons, Envy's Aurora Borealis spun like a dragon towards Felix and stabbed its high-speed spinning ram into Felix's forehead. That was the cursed horn of the demigod-level sea monster, Narwhal. That attack contained some divine power, and it was not something that Felix, who had been stripped of his divine domain, could ignore. Chi. Felix's shrill cries sounded like an extremely vicious curse magic, but unfortunately, the two larger undead beasts locked him down and prevented him from moving. He could only obediently become a live target. But this was only the beginning. The new son of the 7 deadly sins was showing off his abilities in front of his elder brother. Mine. All mine. I'm jealous of your divine eyes. I'm going to take it. The dark light around Envy's body flickered. Felix had lost 4 of his eyes, while 4 dark green compound eyes appeared on the front of the Borealis. Felix, who had lost half of his eyes, was in an even worse state than being blind. A chaotic scene appeared in his mind, and under the pressure of the surrounding beasts, the constant shaking of his vision caused him to lose his balance. "Ah, little brothers, your elder brother is here." That familiar deep voice caused the 2 beasts to simultaneously pause in surprise. Only that guy who made others feel uncomfortable would use such a form of address. But after those frivolous words came a fierce thunderclap. 10 million undead army. Countless undead armies suddenly appeared, and they furiously surged out like a volcano erupting. The low-level undead furiously climbed onto the spider's body, putting on a magical version of ants swallowing an elephant. But the game wasn't over yet. "Ah, my fist is beautiful, even if it's just. My justice is the will of my kingdom." The man in tights made a gliding motion. The countless thin threads were actually a connection that originated from their souls. Those connections gave the man who was so powerful that no one could look at him directly. That exaggerated flying kick directly pierced through the gigantic beast's abdomen. Countless amounts of divine blood sprayed out from the wound, and the ground that was stained by the blood distorted the plants. The wailing spider prince was heavily injured. Omar's attack indeed had the effect of finishing the battle, but what greeted him was the complaints of his comrades. "What elder brother? You're the youngest." "Ah, dang is the elder brother." The 4 deadly sins had all arrived, and the powerful undead army had arrived as reinforcements, allowing the defenders to heave a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, the true protectors of this land, the Ace Knight Squadron, which was said to be undefeatable even with more than 100 enemies, was now moving from an ancient myth into reality. In the sky, streaks of beautiful silver-white light were the even more astonishingly powerful warriors. The experienced Knight Squadron wasn't impatient at all. They were like a pack of wolves surrounding a tiger or leopard, searching for the weakness of their prey. And at this moment, Felix, who was on the verge of collapse, had already revealed his weakness. "Everyone, prepare to charge. Death shoot tactic." The Aurora Knight Squadron, which had never numbered more than 100, actually had close to 300 riders this time. The famous number 1 Knight Squadron of the Northlands had walked out from the ashes of the Mist Kingdom, and the classic tactics of the past had once again appeared on the stage of history. The Aurora Knight Squadron, which was entirely made up of gold, transformed into beautiful silver meteors that soared through the sky. Their spears and ice arrows were currently freezing Felix's vitals and joints, but wherever their subordinate frigid moss stepped, a new path of ice would be formed. And when the crystalline path of the sky rainbow was finally constructed, the slumbering white dragon had already transformed into a deadly sharp sword. "Everyone, charge." At the top of the slanted path of extreme ice, the veteran Knight Squadron was leading the charge. The newbie Air Knight Squadron loosened their reins, allowing the legendary ranked Polar Demon to lead them in a charge. Vanguard, Ice Blade. Invader, go to hell. While it was sliding, the accumulated power of ice formed a sharp blade of ice. And when it didn't matter how big or how fast it kept increasing in speed, it was already a deadly aurora blade that reached the ice path. Countless gigantic aurora blades began to cut at the spider god's body, and when even more ice blades descended, the Aurora Knight Squadron within the ice blades used their own bodies as blades, transforming into streaks of light that tore at Felix's body once again. rear formation, reorganize, second wave, and the night squadron that tossed out its own ice blade flew up once more, flying to the beginning of the ice path to begin a new round of shaping ice weapons. Until all the Aurora Night Frigid Maw Squadron's mana was used up, these ice blades would never end. This was the death shoot tactic that was specially used to bombard and deal with gigantic targets. The highest number of ice blades in history was 36 night squadrons that created the death shoot tactic to kill an immemorial white dragon. But this time, there were more than 10 times that number of Aurora Night squadrons. Those countless ice blades were the pinnacle of physical attacks, and they even contained the cold of death magic. Apart from Ah Dang, who didn't feel any pain, even Bastion and Omar had to urgently avoid them. And this time, it was the turn of the Lion King Gui Ming, who was also Frigid Maw Squadron commander, to transform into a gigantic beast and seal off Felix. But soon, he discovered that this was completely unnecessary as he was immune to ice damage from his own species. Felix was currently limp and injured to the point where he couldn't move at all. Awoof! The blind and crippled spider was of no threat at all. It screamed and howled in pain as the poison god, who brought death, was pierced through repeatedly. Finally, with ice blades all over its body, it collapsed. But at this moment, Ah Dang transformed into a gigantic mouth devourer and bit off the spider's head, dealing a fatal blow to Felix. After the gigantic spider god lost its head and collapsed, I heard the notification of congratulations to my host. The god-slaying quest has been completed. You will be rewarded with a god equipment. I finally relaxed my tense will and immediately cancelled my god's descent. Finally, with the satisfaction of finally winning, I watched Wumian's soul return to my divine kingdom. I gave up and fell into a deep sleep. Congratulations, you did it. When I woke up from my slumber, the first sentence I heard made me feel very stunned. The next moment, all of my fatigue disappeared. That was because I recognized who this young man before me was. Ale. The person who was leaning against the windowsill and looking outside was none other than the death god Ale. However, this time, he wasn't wearing his signature black robe. His long white robe made him seem more like a scholar. What did I do? The aftereffects of God's descent were still present in my body. My chaotic memories were still tangled up in the back of my mind. I didn't even know what had happened. Ale paused in surprise at my question, but then he smiled. Felix died. Although a god participated, he was probably the first god to die at the hands of a mortal in the past 2,000 years. Bits and pieces of memories flooded my mind. The scene of the spider god being surrounded and killed in the end appeared in my mind. A true god who had just ascended to the top of the world had died instantly. The entire world would probably be shocked by this, and Lorcy would definitely be furious. Right, what did Rose do? How did she react? Rose died. Ale fell silent yet again after casually tossing out such a heavy bomb. Died? How did she die? Unlike Felix, Rose had descended in her true body. Although she wouldn't be able to return to her divine kingdom for a short period of time, a true god in her true form would definitely be terrifyingly strong. Unlike Felix, who had just ascended to the divine kingdom, Rose was a veteran true god and was even stronger. Who in the mortal world could kill her? Abyss Prince Cavendish did it. Not even her corpse was left behind. Cavendish? Yes, the fence-sitter finally angered the leaders of both sides. The original leader wanted to kill her, but the New Order faction didn't have anyone willing to protect her, so she died. Now, some of the people who were still wavering are scared to death. Ale said casually, but it only took a little to realize that the news of 2 true gods dying in the Dark Elf God faction would definitely cause a huge commotion. Right, what happened to the northern battlefield? What happened to those beastmen in the end? Ask her. She's probably waiting anxiously. At this moment, the door to my room suddenly opened, and Eliza walked in. She had an expression of relief when she saw that I had woken up. You're finally awake. You've already slept for 6 days. If you didn't wake up, I wouldn't know what to do. 6 days? Perhaps it was because my chaotic memories had blurred my mind, but I felt like less than a day had passed. Countless noisy groups of people entered my room, and they all had one thing in common. Your Highness, Her Highness Renee isn't here, so we need you to decide how to organize our military. The generals of the other countries all want you to attend meetings. You're needed to deal with post-war affairs, new territories, and spoils of war. This time, our dukedom is going to make a huge profit, and we won't be able to control the situation without you. The undead army is currently stationed outside the city. Although they haven't caused any panic due to their performance in that battle, we need an effective communication channel. The Rhodes Kingdom has mentioned the possibility of accepting the Church of Law. The highest-ranked Bishop Shueti requests that you meet with him to discuss the specifics. That man from the undead army actually organized a bodybuilding competition. He and Lord Shueti are competing in beauty in the finals, and they're even going to rip their clothes off. That scene is so beautiful that I don't even dare to say it. Sir, only you can stop them. Before they completely destroy this city, please act quickly. In the blink of an eye, countless messy matters were thrown at me before I could even react. When I turned around to ask for help, I discovered that Ale had already disappeared without a trace. Right after that, I was instantly drowned by the army of people before me. The hospital bed was already filled with all sorts of urgent matters and official documents that needed to be dealt with. Right, Eliza? You can go look for her. She's my authorized representative. Where would I find such a good person? But before I could look at Eliza, the former demon marquis who had long since expected that he would be forced to act as my representative also instantly disappeared without a trace. Hey, don't be so heartless. I just woke up, and you want me to do all this? I wanted to slip away, but the attendants around me had already placed their knives on my neck. They were threatening to kill me if I didn't do anything. I could only sigh helplessly as I took the documents and began the most tiring task. It would be great if the little girl was here. I don't know where Renee went, and Cavendish should have returned by now. Why hasn't Renee returned yet? As expected, once a girl grows up, she no longer cares about her father? At the same time, Renee also exclaimed in surprise. Where is this? Why am I here? Am I not in the Northlands anymore? In the heart of human society, in the Bardi Empire's largest red light district, in the most expensive restaurant, Night of the Elves, Renee suddenly woke up with a start as she was surrounded by women. She then discovered that her surroundings were quite crowded. Why are there so many women here? Achoo! What a strong perfume smell. In the small room, there were more than a dozen gorgeously dressed women looking at her, and those women were either looking at her affectionately, or they couldn't wait to stick their bodies to her, and there were even some who were already groping under her clothes. "Milord, why aren't you singing anymore? I'm still waiting for your little song." The golden-haired young woman blushed as she spoke. Her blush and her eyes were filled with love. She looked at Rain as if she was a young girl in love for the first time. Her large, snow-white breasts were even more dazzling. Rain, who had no experience with this, immediately blushed when she was suddenly hugged, even though she was of the same gender. Then, something even more shocking came from the mouths of the surrounding women. "Milord, are you thinking about it again? Let our sisters rest for a while longer. Many of them were exhausted last night." Although they were saying that they were refusing, their flushed faces and how easily they undid their clothes revealed their true thoughts. Renee couldn't take it anymore when she saw this. Wait, don't take off your clothes. Hey, why are all of you taking off your clothes? I'm a woman as well. Milord just loves to play this kind of game. I already knew that Milord is a woman, but Milord is much stronger than those useless men. Our sisters can't leave you. Everyone is waiting for you to redeem their freedom. This time, looking at these hungry gazes and their snow-white breasts, Renee knew that a disaster was about to befall her. 1 week later, a report was placed in front of Roland and me. What? Renee spent half a month in the most luxurious red light district of the Bardi Empire, winning the favor of countless beauties and the title of Emperor of 10,000 Flowers. She even agreed to countless requests to redeem her freedom, but in the end, she was penniless and was detained by the red light district. She wants us to pay money to redeem her? After hesitating for a moment, I finally replied the messenger. You're probably mistaken. We don't have a man named Renee here. Yep, definitely not. What? She's a woman? Then there's no such thing. Everyone in the Mist royal family is normal, and there are definitely no perverts. Yep, definitely not, I never lie. Chapter 197. Oh, the wild lilies in full bloom. How charming they are. How beautiful their songs are. Their dances are as beautiful as butterflies. She's the queen of the red light district, the dream lover of all men and women. During my meeting with Renee, I purposely found a few bards to sing the hymns that had been sung recently to her. All right, but surprisingly, Renee didn't react at all. She had a blank expression, and her eyes were bloodshot. When she saw me, her legs softened, and she almost fell to the ground. Few. On my arm, she fell asleep in seconds. She actually started snoring. All of the punishment methods that I had prepared had been wasted. It seemed that Rain was having quite a hard time as well. For a gold rank law knight, physical fatigue was nothing much, but the mental pressure was probably suffocating her. After all, to a girl, her reputation, which was the most important thing to her, had been ruined. Even if she wanted to marry, she wouldn't be able to. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but feel some sympathy and guilt. After all, even though this was all Cavendish's fault, the declaration I made back in the Ottoman Empire was the true beginning of all this trouble. Otherwise, I could have thought of a way to explain myself instead of the current legendary Lily Knight Princess Dragonslayer War Chronicles. She and her 18 flowers, novel, storytelling, and drama editions are all selling like hotcakes, and you can even get a 20% discount for bundles. If you buy 3 sets at once, you'll even get a free painting poster. I'm sorry, it's all because we old fellows went too far. Thinking about this, I felt even more guilty. Big brother Roland, Nini doesn't blame you. Hearing these gentle words from my arms, I couldn't help but feel moved, so, stop licking my feet. Nini knows that you like me, but pretending to be a dog isn't a good way to express your love. Also, don't take off your clothes, you're so perverted. You actually want to wear my clothes? Fine, if it's Lon, that's fine. Stop sniffing, it's so embarrassing, and stop licking. Is panties that good? Just directly lick me. My face immediately turned green. What kind of nonsense is this? That, Your Highness, please don't be angry. Her Highness Renee has been cursed by the succubus Sweet Dreams. These days, she has been pulled into strange dreams, so she hasn't slept since she came back. It's not easy for her to stay up until now. Sweet dream curse? What was that? A purgatory succubus' natural talent is to arouse a person's deepest desire. Then, from that opening, the succubus will be led to indulge in their desires and gradually fall into depravity. For example, a greedy person will dream of bathing on a mountain of gold, and a lustful person will dream of being surrounded by countless beauties. As for little Renee Koff, the curse was probably left behind by Cavendish. It made her more inclined towards desire and depravity towards chaos, so that it would be easier for me to descend into chaos next time. All right, as a demon lord, Eliza naturally understood the knowledge of the chaos abyss very well. Thus, upon hearing this, I smiled in delight. In other words, Renee's heart is full of those messy thoughts? Was this her innermost wish? My black history of cross-dressing? A pervert who treats me as a fetish? He. It seems that I really need to correct her. No, just a personality correction punch isn't enough. Let's just brainwash her and recreate her personality. At the very least, That dark history of hers definitely can't be left behind. With a face full of smiles, I carried Renee and walked towards my room. It seemed that I would have to prepare a brainwashing forbidden spell. I would be quite busy today. Her Highness Renee is in trouble. His Highness Roland must be furious to death. Even His Highness Roland has darkened. His smile is so scary. As for me, I suddenly thought of something as I turned around and smiled at the attendants. You didn't hear anything today, did you? Or, do you want me to help you forget something? The two of them had panicked expressions as they kept shaking their heads. I didn't hear anything. I definitely didn't hear anything. I nodded in satisfaction as I looked at the two lads who kept shaking their heads. Obedient children were good children, while disobedient naughty children needed to be disciplined. Looking at Renee in my arms, I chuckled. Let's start from there. Right, it's been a long time since I played mud wrestling and bungee jumping. The little black room seems pretty good too, however. The sound of the wind whistling past and the familiar heavy footsteps made me close my eyes helplessly. Boom! A huge hole appeared in the wall that had just been repaired. Beside it, there were already 3 human-shaped holes that had just been patched up. Boom! Alright, I just knew it. These fellows never knew how to use the door. Ha! Come and catch me then. Don't run, Ah Dang is the older brother. The bastard who made us run naked during the chaos. The scene of these brothers fooling around was really nostalgic. However, the little dwarf who was the older brother was holding the 1,000-ton stone pillar and swung it around, creating a huge hole in the wall. On the other hand, the big muscle man who was the younger brother could casually open a hole in the wall. From a certain standpoint, the mental age of the two of them was quite young. I could understand their fooling around, but if I were to be dragged into it, no matter if it's Omar's brute strength or Ah Dang's huge stone pillar, both of them would probably die on the spot. Dying from playing hide and seek with a brat? That's too scary. Thus, I did my best to hide my existence and intended to leave quietly. However, I felt that something was wrong. Wait, where did that stone pillar come from? Why does it look so familiar? I feel like I've just seen it before. Then, I thought of it, but it was already too late. Ah, darned Ah Dang, that's the main pillar of this house. Well, the lower and lower ceilings, the crashing of the house, have given me the answer. The Beastman King Emont Blood Axe is dead? From a certain standpoint, this was completely within my expectations. Before I lost consciousness, the tables had turned and the Highland Beastmen were forced into a desperate situation. The final reinforcements, the Highland Beastmen, were blocked off by the undead army and the underground. When they discovered that even a true god was about to die, and that the human reinforcements were becoming stronger and stronger, the Highland Beastmen, who had just suffered a painful defeat a year ago, rationally chose to retreat. When the Caradon tribe leader retreated with all the Highland Beastmen tribes, the surviving Highland Beastmen discovered to their astonishment that they had lost all their allies, while the enemy's power level had increased immeasurably without them realizing it. We absolutely can't let Felix die. Otherwise, we'll all die here. The invincible true god's descended body was forced into a desperate situation. The Beastmen's remaining troops were forced to enter the battlefield. They knew that the blood feud they had with the Northland's humans, Shilua's undead, Greyblood elves, and the underground allied army would be impossible for them to win. In order to avoid unnecessary losses, the Beastmen's main forces had retreated to the Divine Domain. When they truly began to rescue Felix, they would first have to face the ambushes of the underground allied army and the undead army. Shilua's reinforcements and the underground allied army were all powerful and well prepared. That was why the Beastmen's reinforcements were naturally intercepted. In this desperate situation, when Felix died, some of the Beastmen finally laid down their weapons and chose to surrender. However, Emont Blood Axe and the remaining Beastmen tribe leaders unhesitatingly chose to fight to the death instead of retreating. They knew that as the instigator of this invasion and as the #1 war criminal, they would definitely be punished after they lost the battle. In that case, rather than being humiliated and hanged on the gallows, it would be better to gloriously die in battle. And so, Amont's severed head became the spoils of war of a certain young soldier, and the fanatical beastmen army finally met with complete annihilation. They either died or surrendered. Following the fall of Amont Bloodaxe, the largest beastmen invasion in the past 200 years had officially failed. Even if the humans didn't deal with the Highland beastmen, they would still need at least 100 or 200 years to recover. And I knew that they probably wouldn't have any hope for the duration of this holy war. Without a guardian god, they would only weaken even further. And in reality, this wasn't the only loss in this battle, nor was it the biggest loss. The biggest loss was the Dark Elves, who originally had nothing to do with this. In the past 1,000 years, Rose had led the Dark Elves to make a living in the underground world. The original superior elf empire's values had long since been twisted. The Dark Elves' social customs, culture, religion, and social structure were all branded with Rose's personal mark. It could be said that the majority of the Dark Elves were Rose's personal property. Just like how the humans on the surface couldn't imagine life without the sun, the Dark Elves couldn't imagine life without Rose. But now Lorcy was dead. In the span of a single night, Lorcy's priests and matriarchs, who stood at the top of Dark Elf society, were all heavily injured. They would either directly die or fall into insanity. The best result would be losing all of their power. And in the cruel world of Dark Elves, being weak was the greatest sin. And if the powerless were still the high and mighty matriarchs, then what awaited them was an even more pitiful ending. In a single night, when the news of a true god's death was confirmed by the priests who had lost their power, 90% of the underground world under Rose's control fell into chaos. The entire Dark Elf society fell into chaos. And what was more dangerous wasn't just the social chaos. All along, Rose had been the supreme existence of most of the Dark Elves. Her will was the law and pursuit of this race. Every family fought against each other in order to obtain the Spider Queen's favor. The entire Dark Elf race lived for Rose's benefit. And now she had fallen. Then, to the Dark Elves who viewed Rose as their sky, this was no different from the sky collapsing. The fatal loss of faith and collapse was the true trouble. Some of those whose faith had collapsed turned into fearless thugs, some chose to commit suicide, but the majority still instinctively searched for new replacements. In a single night, countless new gods, fake gods, and evil gods appeared. Many existences who could ascend to godhood locked their sights on the gap left by Rose. Actually, the god of law Womians acted very quickly. Those silver-masked judges were swiftly and effectively restoring order in the various underground world elves. Of course, Sulphur Mountain City's military might was also a deterrent. At the very least, it was obvious that the red hunting hounds who remained in the underground world had sent out their troop. If this situation continued, before the birth of a new true god of the Dark Elves, the entire race would probably fall apart and then be eaten up by various factions. Of course, the one who would benefit the most would be the current underground autarch, Anne's faction. At the very least, the Church of Law, which was restoring order in the various underground world and giving justice to thugs, was becoming more and more popular among the Dark Elf commoners. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before the new order of the Dark Elf Society would shock the entire world. It wasn't that the other true gods didn't want to interfere, but from a certain standpoint, this was also a war between the Dark Elf gods and the Law gods. And now, as the victor, the Law gods, was beginning to reap the spoils of war. Naturally, the other true gods had no chance of interfering. In a short half a month, not only did Womians replenish the god power he lost during the god's descent, but due to the extreme expansion of his believers and territory, he even began to advance once again. This time, if he was able to completely take over Rose's territory, he might even become a mid-level god like Rose. In fact, Womians even began to consider the possibility of establishing a follower god to become the dark elf guardian god. If it was a peaceful era, going from a quasi-god to a low god and then to a mid-level god would be an exceptionally arduous journey. For a true god to advance, it would require thousands of years of accumulation, and countless generations of guardian gods would be required. However, this was during the Holy War, and this was also an opportunity that the Holy War brought to the true gods. In every Holy War, countless new gods would rise and fall. It wouldn't matter much if one had a good laugh now. Only the one who had the last laugh would be the true victor. I had handed over all the mortal affairs of the Church of Law to Shueti and Lilith, so I didn't intend on managing them at all. However, since Roland had successfully completed a god's descent and hadn't died yet, not only was his status as a god envoy confirmed, the law job class members were also looking at me with fanatical gazes, which made me recall the events of Womian's era. But right now, I didn't have the time to worry about such matters. An even greater problem was right in front of me. Today, the main point of our discussion is still the rescue work of the Northlands elves. Right now, they're constantly facing natural disasters, with hailstorms and blizzards coming one after another. I heard that there was even a blizzard and hurricane just a few days ago. They also lack winter rations and clothing, and some of the insane dark elves have turned into thugs. If we continue to ignore them, I'm afraid that the Northlands elves will become history. However, the moment I finished speaking, there was only silence. It was obvious that the generals of the various countries lacked interest. After all, every country had suffered great losses in this battle, and the indecisive elves had spent most of their time on the enemy's side. Many elves already had a blood feud with them, so how could they possibly be willing to help? Seeing this situation, I laughed. Fine, if you don't care, I'll care. Hearing this, all the generals paused in surprise. This time, the main target of the elves' enmity was the Sluwir kingdom, which was the people of the mist. Although this person in front of me had a good reputation on the surface, his reputation in private was comparable to that of an apocalyptic demon king. No matter how I looked at him, he didn't seem like a selfless good person who would repay evil with good. Yep, I've been longing for Liusu City for a long time. That library has been passed down for tens of thousands of years, and the countless magic and art treasures passed down from the Elven Empire can't be destroyed by this disaster. Alright, as soon as I said this, everyone instantly understood. How was he going to help them? He was going to dig up a plot of land. Of course, he could have done all this in secret, but why did he say it out loud? Just what was this living legend thinking? Just what did he intend to do? Why did he have to bring up this topic here? For a moment, the conference room fell silent. Only the sound of my index finger tapping on the table could be heard. The Holy War has already begun, and there will no longer be a peaceful place in the entire continent. This time, we were able to deal with it because of luck. Next time, we might not have the descent of a true god or so many reinforcements. In order to deal with the upcoming Holy War, I intend to establish an alliance in the Northlands, the Mist Alliance. First of all, it will abide by the principle of non-war, don't start a war of aggression, and it will believe in law and the Northland's guardian god as its national religion. That's why everyone doesn't need to worry that the Mist Alliance will be a threat to the various countries. Under the terms of the Mist Alliance, each country will have the right to be independent and not interfere with each other's internal affairs. This is the most basic rule. Secondly, it will abide by Womian's teachings. As long as one hasn't committed a crime, all species and individuals are innocent and non-evil. That's why the Mist Alliance won't limit the number of species and countries that can join. According to what I know, at least the remnants of Shilua, some underground residents who yearn for the light, the Cheryl Autonomous Region's half-beastmen, the Barbarian Alliance, the Donlon Principality, and the Sluwir Kingdom have all submitted their applications to join the Mist Alliance. Hearing this, everyone's faces were filled with astonishment. This was already far beyond the realm of betrayal. It would be understandable for the gods' churches to send down a divine decree to summon a holy war the very next day. But if this mist alliance was truly established, everyone couldn't help but shiver. At this time, with so many powerful factions allied together, it was likely that the entire Northlands would be under Womian's control. At that time, Womians would become the true guardian god of the Northlands. The Mist Alliance would doubtlessly be a super-heavy political and military bomb. Everyone would have to constantly think about the effects of its establishment. From a certain standpoint, this war was also a melting pot. All the species that hated each other got to know each other and established a basic level of trust. This gigantic alliance would then become a reality. This isn't appropriate, is it? This holy church, heh. Hearing this, I chuckled and then spoke in a serious tone. Marchioness Ai Shio of Rhodes, do you still not recognize her? This is already the middle of the holy war. Us Northland barbarians can't rely on anyone else. If we don't band together for warmth, how will we survive this difficult winter? Marchioness Ai Shio was about to say something, but I shook my head. I know what you want to say. Relax. Soon, the flames of war will be ignited everywhere. The Holy Church won't even be able to deal with its own matters. Besides, this is also Womian's will. As a true god of order, do you really think that he'll be treated as a heretic? We're just pitiful people who need to band together to survive the winter. The Mist Alliance will never actively invade us. But do we Northlanders not even have the right to survive? After hesitating for a moment, Ai Shio finally gave up on speaking. But for me, this was only the beginning. The only legal successor of the Tassel Kingdom, Princess Ansuna, has also requested to join the Mist Alliance. So, after this rescue mission is completed, perhaps all the Northlands elves will become members of the Mist Alliance as well. All the generals present were shocked. This was already quite direct. She intended to swallow the entire elven species in one go. Her appetite was actually so huge. That's why I hope that all the countries will join this alliance and participate in the rescue mission together. We will open up all sorts of technology within the Mist Alliance. This includes the magic swordsmen and floating airships that appeared in this war. This time, the royal families of all the elven countries suffered a destructive blow, and their main armies were completely destroyed. Perhaps there won't be any more Northlands elven countries in the future. It'll be great for the elves to live together in the various countries. Discussing benefits between countries was the most practical. The Mist Kingdom's new technology and the elves' secret inheritances were astonishingly tempting. There wouldn't be a second chance if they missed this opportunity. Without a doubt, throwing out the bait was the most effective form of invitation. After saying all this, I turned around and left. I had said all that I needed to say. If I still didn't take care of the rescue mission, Ansuna would start haunting my room again in the middle of the night. As my most trusted aide, Eliza had been waiting outside my door for quite some time. Aren't you afraid that you'll force them too much and cause a life-and-death struggle? Relax. Nobody's an idiot. Once the Holy War begins, the mega-empires won't even have the time to worry about us. Small countries want to survive, and now is the best time to suck up to a powerful ally. This time, the ally we've revealed is both white and tender. Once they understand the situation, they'll want nothing more than to pounce on us. Sexual harassment. Eliza adjusted her eyeglasses as she changed the topic in a rather abnormal direction. But suddenly, an attendant passed by me, and a slip of paper appeared in my hand. 2 hours from now, I hope to have a small gathering. Ai Shio Soder. Haha, see, the first person to suck up to a powerful ally is here. Chapter 198. The Mist Alliance had actually been in the works for a very long time already. The Mist Alliance would be an alliance with a common goal at its core. Every country would believe in the god of law, follow the law system, and follow the principle of non-war. In the remote Northlands, I would establish a relatively peaceful regional alliance. Yes, it would only be an alliance, not a kingdom that would be passed down from generation to generation, nor would it be an empire. I had no intentions of becoming a dragon in a different world. Becoming an emperor had never been my goal. In fact, I didn't even intend to become the leader of any faction. I'll do my best to reduce the Holy War's scale and casualties, gather as much power as possible, and finally stop the war and survive this crisis. My original goal had never changed. During this period of hard work, I seemed to have achieved some result. First of all, the most important part, Womians had become stronger. This didn't seem like a big deal, but in my plan to break the cycle of Hades, Womians couldn't reach the level of an Order main god. The rest of the plan would be pointless, and only if this boss, behind the scenes, became stronger would I be able to avoid being slapped to death by some powerful individual who didn't like me. In a way, Womians was the true victor of this war. He had his own Valkyrie Highness and the path of reincarnation. He also had the Northlands, a land blessed by the god. From now on, he had his own territory, and finally broke away from the third-rate gods, false gods and evil gods. Currently, Womians was advancing from a low god to a medium god. His divine concepts included law, contracts, and the guardian god of the Northland. However, he hadn't actually obtained a complete divine concept yet. Law and contracts were both new things. Contracts had only become popular in the Ottoman Empire. Although they seemed to have limitless potential in my eyes, there were far too few users and believers, which actually didn't provide Womians with much power of belief. Although the power of law had greater potential, it was only popular in Sulphur Mountain City. Practically every city in the world had believers, and this was something I had accumulated over 100 years. Although the underground and the small country of Donglan also had many believers, it hadn't been long enough. Most of them were just ordinary believers, and their understanding of law was superficial, which didn't provide much power of belief to Womians. However, it was different for the guardian god of the north. As long as the guardian god protected the race and the region, even if they weren't believers, they would still be protected. The prayers and prayers of gratitude were also able to provide Womians with large amounts of faith origin power. This time, Womians even performed a god's descent. That was an actual divine miracle that was more convincing than anything else. It was likely that the Northland's guardian god's divine miracle would soon spread throughout the entire Northlands, and the Northland's countries that had established the Church of Law as their national religion would provide faith origin power to Womians through dual divine concepts, guardian and law. It hadn't even been 2 years since he ascended to godhood, yet he was already about to advance to intermediate divine power. This was simply unimaginable. It was likely that Womians had already become the focal point of both camps. But those who stand out will either be treated as cannon fodder or killed with a slap. Attracting too much attention is clearly not a good thing. It seems that I have to keep a low profile for now. No matter if I was recognized by the Order faction's higher-ups, or if I was praised by them that, with great power comes great responsibility, I would be sent to the front lines as cannon fodder, or if I was treated as a thorn in the side of the Chaos faction and eliminated early. None of these were things that I wanted to see. Since the war here has stopped, then I should be able to live a few days of peace. It's also time to relax. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but smile. Fighting to the death, wasn't it all for the sake of a peaceful and prosperous place for everyone to live a better life? But then, thinking about what was to come next, my satisfied smile turned into a helpless bitter smile. He's growing too quickly. Even with ALS protection, I still need to be careful. It's actually easier for a main god to protect a low god who doesn't even have a territory. After all, there won't be much of a conflict of interest. But now, Womians intends to take over the entire Northlands, which means that he wants to establish his own faction. He's developing too quickly without a stable foundation. There will definitely be people who will be jealous. Those true gods of the Order faction might not be that powerful in battle, but they are extremely skilled at scheming and stabbing others in the back. After all, they just had a history of nearly 2,000 years of internal strife, and the number of seniors who mysteriously fell is not small. But the Church of Non-War is indeed a good reason. Since we can't actively participate in battle, we naturally can't become cannon fodder. In that case, unless the Order faction comes looking for us, we should focus on defense for now. At the very least, before the undead calamity arrives, we shouldn't blindly expand our territory. We can't give the other true gods and major empires any reason to attack us. The Mist Alliance's member countries are also limited to the Northlands. This way, the other mega-empires won't have to worry about us. Of course, I knew that it was impossible to make a tiger become a vegetarian. At the very least, the Ottoman Empire and San Antonio had long since set their eyes on the Northlands. But as long as I succeeded in delaying the undead calamity for a few years, they probably wouldn't have time to worry about us. Will the next calamity be the undead calamity? I just don't know if it'll happen sooner or later. From a certain standpoint, the Shilua Empire's internal strife hadn't solved the fundamental problem yet. The undead lords that escaped to the undead plains would definitely affect the undead emperors there. As long as the undead emperors still wanted to return to the mortal plane, the undead plains invasion would be inevitable as the elemental tide increased in intensity. The only thing that I could relax about was that the undead calamity likely wouldn't come for the Northlands. After all, the Northlands was vast and sparsely populated. It would definitely be less attractive to the undead emperors than the densely populated central regions of the continent. If I was the commander of the undead army, I would definitely ambush San Antonio and Bayer, taking down the most populated provinces and cities, and then create an undead calamity and death plague. I accidentally got too into character. This was all my occupational disease. Still, I was quite confident in my own professional judgment. After all, I had once been an undead emperor, and my deductions coincided with historical undead invasions. If the undead army wanted to strengthen, it would be necessary for them to have a snowball effect. In that case, they would have to take down the major countries with long histories, revive the powerful individuals from their tombs, and use the commoners' corpses as cannon fodder in order to create countless new armies, using battle to fight. Fine then, I seem to have gotten too excited again. When the undead really invade, the undead under my command will probably receive strange looks as well. Perhaps it's time to act ahead of time. It's time to give them a new skin, a new name, and a new organization. At the very least, the world will know that they aren't those crazy and bloodthirsty undead. Omar brought Shilua's remaining troops, my red hunting hounds, and the native undead of Sulphur Mountain City. Unknowingly, I had quite a few undead under my command. It was indeed time to act ahead of time. Anubis's army? I don't think there's such a dog-headed god in this world. Although it's quite a pity for the dog-headed god, I still reject it. The Forgotten. That sounds like a copyright infringement. I'll probably have to explain to others what was forgotten. Rejected. Death Rock? That sounds like something strange mixed in. Rejected. Guards of the Hades? That sounds nice, but it's a little too ostentatious. I feel like it's missing something. How about I combine the first two names? Guards of the Hades' dog-headed god? Yep, that sounds like a rhyme, and it's quite meaningful. I'll use Bastet's head as the emblem, and I can even add a dog-headed god helmet. The more I think about it, the better it sounds. As expected, I'm a genius at naming things. The more I thought about it, the happier I became. In the end, I even said it out loud. "Milord, please don't. Otherwise, Bastet and everyone else will cry." A familiar voice filled with confusion came from a familiar person. The silver-masked Lilith Milan appeared in front of me. Previously, she had been in charge of work in Definder, but now that the war had come to an end, it was time for her to come here to talk about her work. Just like how the naked bishop had exposed his identity by performing art in a place where no other Tauren was present, my identity had been discovered by someone who was familiar with me. Of course, some things were fine as long as they were known, and there was no need to expose them. At the very least, I reckoned that the 4 heavenly kings of law already knew about it. But right now, Lilith didn't have the time to reminisce about the past. Of course, she was happy to meet an old boss and an old friend, but to hear such explosive mutterings as soon as she arrived? Perhaps the Northland's undead would all have the name Dog-Headed God in the future. That wouldn't make her happy at all. And based on her understanding of Roland, if he really put on the Dog-Headed God Army label, it would probably be quite difficult to take it off. But simply objecting wasn't enough. And so, Lilith could only rack her brains and try to think of a more suitable name. How about sinless? Not only does it show that they're foundationally different from ordinary undead, it also means that they've chosen to be under the protection of the law god. They're sinless citizens who have chosen to follow the law. I was hesitating about whether or not to accept this suggestion. Yep, I was only purely thinking about the pros and cons of these 2 names. It definitely wasn't because I felt that the dog-headed god emblem was really cool, nor was it because I felt that seeing an undead army wearing dog-headed god helmets would be interesting. I definitely didn't have any selfish desires. Lilith seemed to notice that I was hesitating as she thought about it for a moment. Then, she revealed an expression of sudden realization and directly added another sentence. Even if they're called sinless, they can still wear the dog-headed god emblem and helmet. We can even make Lord Botet the symbol of the entire species. As the Red Hunting Hound's army leader, he should be quite happy. Yep, good suggestion. It's decided then. Lilith inwardly apologized to Botet, who was about to become a mascot. She also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. After all, from a certain standpoint, she would also be a member of the sinless. It would be far too difficult for a female who loved to look beautiful to accept being called a dog-headed god emblem. But just as she heaved a sigh of relief, she heard a nostalgic nickname. Fina? Isn't this my cute little Fina? Amelia actually ran over with an expression of pleasant surprise, waving her hands as she ran. It was rare to see her so happy since she was used to having such a dark expression. However, Lilith's expression was also quite pleasant to look at. Surprise, disbelief, anger, and helplessness were all displayed on her face. After knowing her for so long, this was the first time that I discovered that she actually had a talent for beauty. You 2 know each other? Fina? Lilith, is that your real name? I recalled that Lilith had come to Sulphur Mountain City by herself. Every single Blood Tribe member who didn't have a family would likely have unpleasant memories, so it was quite normal for her to abandon her original real name. Milord, there's no Fina Milan here right now. There's only Lilith Milan. Lilith's expression was calm as she spoke. However, Amelia still had an expression of pleasant surprise as she hugged Lilith. Fina, just where did you run off to? I've been looking for you. Aunt Amelia, please don't call me Fina in the future. I'm Lilith Milan. Fina Milan has long since ceased to exist in this world. Don't be silly. No matter what, you were once the former empress of the Bardi Empire, my cutest little niece. Only now did I discover that both of them had the surname Milan, and they looked rather similar. It would seem that they were relatives, and so I pulled over a chair and did my best to reduce my presence as I prepared to watch the show. As the 2 of them exclaimed in surprise, I soon figured out the complicated relationship between them. Yep, the complicated relationship was between Lilith and Amelia. Amelia was simply happy to see her niece that she hadn't seen for many years. As for Lilith's story, it was even more legendary. There's actually a continuation to that ridiculous version of Sleeping Beauty from another world? That's right, Amelia was the evil witch in that story. The Lilith Milan before me was the female lead of that story of Sleeping Beauty that ruined my childhood. Fina Milan. Xiaofun. Alright, little Lilith, don't worry. I've already stood up for you. I've already thrown that ungrateful and fickle man into the special botanical garden. I'm afraid he's already turned into fertilizer. Sigh, I thought that necrophilic prince wouldn't be interested in ordinary women, so he definitely wouldn't be a playboy or a scammer. At the very least, he would be a good person. It's all my aunt's fault for misjudging him. Humph, little Lilith, do you believe me this time? My aunt was absolutely right. Not a single man in this world is good. All right then, I was viciously glared at for no reason at all. This was basically me getting shot even though I was just lying down. However, through their conversation, I had more or less figured out the ins and outs of the matter. So this was the original story of Sleeping Beauty, but it wasn't so romantic. A foreign prince with a special fetish woke up the Sleeping Beauty, and the curse of the willful which was lifted. However, what happened next wasn't so fairy tale-like. Lilith's father was overjoyed when he saw that his daughter had woken up. He thought that this was the legendary kiss of true love type of development. He was overjoyed that his daughter had found her true love, but in the end, he foolishly betrothed Lilith, who hadn't even figured out the situation, to that prince. And that foreign prince, who didn't have the right to inherit the throne, unhesitatingly proposed to the emperor's only daughter, the future empress. The story after that was no longer fairy tale-like. The prince, who had a strange sexual orientation, had no interest in his new wife at all. Instead, he spent all day patrolling the tombs in his territory. Finally, the prince, who had learned undead magic, decided to change his wife into the type that he loved the most. And so, he used the blood tribe's curse on her, turning her into a living corpse. He then tried to use evil undead magic to enslave her. However, he didn't expect that the princess was actually an outstanding swordsman as well. Coincidentally, she was transformed into a noble blood tribe member and regained her intelligence. And so, an intense conflict erupted between the two of them in the royal palace. Next, the Bardi Empire's holy church knight and priest arrived in time to exorcise the evil empress who bathed in blood in order to maintain eternal youth. In the end, after covering up this royal scandal, the throne fell to that prince. Of course, judging from Amelia's words, he didn't do it for long. Soon, the Furious Witch discovered all of this when she was visiting her family. In the end, the prince became fertilizer for the witch's garden. Evil was punished and justice was upheld. It was another standard fairy tale ending. It was a cause for celebration, and a pity for celebration. Congratulations, my ass. No matter how I look at it, it's all your fault, Roland. What? I was innocently attacked once again. I clearly hadn't even heard of this story before. Now that I thought about it, back in the day, I was searching all over the world for clues to my revenge. How could it be my fault as well? If it wasn't for your betrayal causing me to lose trust in men, how could I have set up such a harsh test to test little Lilith's future husband? In the end, the one who passed was such a pervert, causing Lilith to suffer such misfortune in the end. In the end, all of this is your fault. I was instantly rendered speechless. It wasn't that I couldn't retort, it was that I was so angry that I didn't know what to say. You can blame me for all of this? Then I've basically become the root of all evil. Aunt, don't blame Lord Roland. It's all Lilith's fault. Ha, I've gotten over it now. Men are ugly and untrustworthy. I only like women now. The me back then was far too foolish. Alright then, so the rumors that some people's sexual orientations would change after suffering a major emotional setback were actually true. When Amelia heard her niece's declaration of being a lesbian, she took 2 steps back with a pale face. It would seem that she was far more innocent than she appeared on the surface. But then, I discovered that I had misunderstood. Amelia actually started crying loudly. Waff, pitiful little Nana, it's all your aunt's fault. Even if that bastard is already dead, your aunt will definitely help you find that bastard's undead teacher. Wah, it's all that bastard's fault. He said something like, don't care about what others think, work hard to pursue true love, and if your lover doesn't meet your standards, you can try using your own methods to change her and accept her. That irresponsible undead mage who spouted nonsense is the true culprit. When I heard this angry roar, the snacks in my hand instantly fell to the ground. Why did these words sound so modern? Why did they sound so familiar? They were exactly the same as a chicken soup for the soul novel that I had read in another world. Could it be that such things were popular in this world as well? Prince, back then, in order to collect information for my revenge, I did indeed take in several powerful disciples. One of them was Swanna's father. I think he was also from Somme. Could it be? Roland told me this before. He was the one who encouraged me to follow my heart and pursue true love. That was how I finally made the decision to abandon my prejudices and work hard to pursue my new happiness. Could it be that these words have already been spread? It's a famous quote. Lilith had a stunned expression, but Amelia lowered her head and muttered something. I knew it, only he. Then, she suddenly turned around and smiled at me. Ha, it's indeed a famous quote, but it'll soon become the crazy words of a dead man. As expected, only you can become the culprit. Her blood-red eyes were the bright red of a wild beast, and her green hair was growing furiously. Her killing intent and anger were already exploding, and even the ground was trembling under her frightening brute force. I knew it. Those seemingly reasonable chicken soup for the soul are all so unreliable. Trying to enlighten others like that will most likely cause problems. Ah, Amelia, don't hit my face. I still have a meeting to attend. Chapter 199. The Mist Alliance was a new faction that would rise up. However, there were some things that needed to be decided beforehand. Strategic planning, or perhaps I should call it a general division of the regions. If these couldn't be decided quickly, there would likely be endless disputes in the future. The first thing that needed to be decided was the location of the headquarters. Or, perhaps I should call it the location of the capital. There were a few suitable locations. Definder and Antoon were both excellent candidates. Definder was the god of Law Womian's holy land, the Sinless City. It was also quite suitable for displaying the God of Law's special traits, so it would be fine to be the new capital. At the very least, with Definder as the capital, I wouldn't have to worry about the public support and defending the city. Try attacking the God of Law's holy land. Law job class members that are several times stronger than usual are waiting for you. Perhaps Womians will personally descend to the mortal world to deal with you. Definder, the capital that would never fall again, was indeed quite attractive, especially for me personally. I also hoped that Definder would be able to swiftly rebuild with the resources of the entire Mist Alliance, so that the Northland's former capital could be restored to its former glory. However, it was obvious that Definder wasn't the best choice. As for the latter, Antoon was the largest city in the entire Northlands. Its businesses and industries were all quite developed, and due to a certain person's surrender, this city had been preserved relatively well from the flames of war. As long as some resources and funds were invested, it would be possible to make it flourish again. As Antoon's political status rose, its well-established trade routes would be of great use. Plus, the Mist Alliance also had tax-free trade routes, so it was only a matter of time before it became a major commercial city. Even though both cities had many advantages, in the end, I still helplessly gave up on choosing the two countries' capitals as the headquarters, choosing Red Maple City instead. Yep, it was this ruined city that had already been reduced to rubble. This was originally only a second-tier city in the Slawir Kingdom, and its most famous landmark was its War History Museum. After this battle, the museum would probably have many more collections to add to its collection. After more than 2 months of war, including cruel street battles, and even a god's descent, it would be an exaggeration to say that this place was in ruins. If this was the capital, it would be no different from peacefully building a city. But in the end, I still chose it. The reason? Only this place was suitable. Although the Mist Alliance would definitely have the people of the Mist at its core, it would ultimately become an alliance of many different species and countries. If the Mist Alliance chose Antoon or Definder, which meant that choosing Donglan or Sluwir as their capital would be far too obvious in terms of politics. The result of this would be that the other allied countries would definitely be wary of us in the future, and it would also be detrimental to the equality between the people of the Mist and the other species. That was why I could only give up on these two seemingly perfect options. Politically speaking, choosing this battlefield where the various species and countries of the Northlands had allied together to fight against the invaders would make it the future capital of the Mist Alliance. At the very least, this would give the participating soldiers a natural sense of closeness. Perhaps this would even give the participating countries the impression that the Mist Alliance was independent from the other countries, so that they wouldn't retaliate too much. If I could accomplish this, that would be my greatest victory. Of course, since the Sluwir Kingdom and the Donglan Principality were the two countries of the people of the Mist as the core, it would be impossible for the Mist Alliance to be completely independent. But at the very least, it would be possible for the Mist Alliance to maintain its reputation. Even if I decided that Red Maple City would be the capital, Antoon and Definder wouldn't give up on it. Definder, which was already unlikely to fall, might be relatively remote and barren, but it could definitely become a logistics center, a military center, and a technological center. And Red Maple City's special status as a guiltless city would allow it to become the Church of Law's headquarters. It would also be like Sulphur Mountain City in the past, creating a place where different species could coexist together in order to attract even more believers of law. As for the Sluwir Kingdom's Antoon City, it would be sufficient for it to continue acting as a commercial center. Of course, I still had a series of other plans that I wouldn't discuss here. I could predict that based on current developments, Definder in the south, Red Maple City in the center, and Antoon in the north would become the three most important cities in the Mist Alliance's lifeline. In fact, I was even considering setting up a regular airship route between these three cities. At the very least, these three cities would become the people of the Mist's dream home, and the already destroyed Mist Kingdom would begin its revival once more. Of course, while ideals were beautiful, reality was often cruel. My plans had already been calculated for 10 years, but the Red Maple City before me was still nothing but rubble. Today, while Red Maple City was still immersed in the joy of victory, outside of a 3-story building in Red Maple City, there were sentries every few steps. Security was extremely tight. This place used to be a base that Red Maple City had given to the people of Donglan. After that, it was given to Olivia, Timlad, Amelia, and the other technicians to be used as a logistics and research base. Due to the intermittent sounds of explosions and screams of pain, along with the occasional large fire and mushroom cloud, this place became a plague zone in the eyes of most citizens even during the relatively peaceful post-war period. Nobody dared to approach it. There was a reason why this place was so heavily guarded. There was an incredibly important surgery going on here, and the people involved were all incredibly important. There was no room for any mistakes. But since Amelia was the one performing the surgery, it wasn't wrong to call it an experiment. The spacious room was completely empty, and there was not a single sound to be heard. There was no one else in the empty room. Even though this surgery was incredibly difficult, Amelia obviously trusted the Vine assistant that she had personally cultivated more than the rookie assistant who was prone to making mistakes. This was a typical witch's room. There were cursed dolls, scarecrows, live lizards in glass bottles, and strange drawings that reminded people of vicious curses. Of course, there was also a gigantic magic pot that was a witch's trademark. Strange magical runes were drawn on top of the pitch-black pot, and the thick black liquid inside it gave off a disgusting stench. Actually, The things floating in the pot were even more disgusting. The silly cat, dark green herbs, strange gems, and living plants that were screaming in pain. It was likely that no one would want to drink a single mouthful of this. And right now, Amelia, who was sharpening her knife, wasn't using her usual tools. Instead, she was using an adamantine saw to cut an unknown green object. Ha, it's finally done. Putting down the electric drill and saw, Amelia breathed a sigh of relief. The bloody piece of light green meat was finally cut off. Then, she threw the piece of meat, which was still dripping with green blood, into the pot. In an instant, a green mist gushed out, and the bonsai next to the pot withered instantly. Hey, that's not right. This is obviously poison. Hey, Amelia, just what do you intend to do? Didn't I want you to perform the surgery? Why did you concoct poison? As the person involved in this surgery, my intestines were green with regret. But after I was injected with a large amount of anesthetic and a paralysis spell that was enough to paralyze a winter wolf, I couldn't feel anything below my neck. Thus, even though I saw that something was wrong with Amelia, I couldn't move from my bed and could only shout in regret. As expected, I should have looked for Marguerite. Damn it, where did they sneak off to this time? Hey, Amelia, how could these things have anything to do with the surgery I requested? You can't be thinking of taking revenge on me, right? Looking at the witches giggling foolishly as they stirred in the pot with the saw, I felt more and more suspicious. After all, I had accidentally and severely offended Amelia and Lilith recently. Although I immediately apologized sincerely after the incident, and used a 300-page thesis to prove that the perverted prince's actions had absolutely nothing to do with me. Sometimes when a woman's anger gets to her head, she'll directly go for the results. It would be strange if she could reason with me. But I was still considered lucky. At least I could still move my head after being anesthetized, deprived of consciousness. The other person involved in the surgery was lying beside me, unable to even raise her head. Grim, Glina, was tightly bound by chains. Her fearless eyes were filled with fear, and her tightly bound mouth was making whimpering sounds. Although she was struggling, I knew that she was definitely unable to open the chains. Why would I know? That's because I was the one who tied her up, back then, in order to prevent her from running away. I purposely used a special binding technique and an especially sturdy rope. Who knew that we would be in the same boat? Speaking of which, even though it was the binding technique that accentuated her figure, it was still as flat as before. Waff! She seemed to notice my regretful gaze, so her face was filled with anger. But then, she kept blinking at me. Judging from how she was looking down, it seemed that she was trying to guide me to look at something. But with just one glance, I was startled. You want me to look below your waist? Why are you lifting up your skirt? There's a red fuse. You actually put explosives in your skirt? Aren't you afraid of blowing yourself up? As expected of a natural-born explosive maniac. Underneath her long lace skirt, yellow explosives were actually tied to her snow-white thighs. Underneath her entire skirt was a dangerous arsenal. As the queen of a country, Grim was quite ridiculous. She still spent most of her time and energy on her hobby, creating new types of bombs. But obviously, the maids and aides in the royal palace wouldn't allow the queen to play with explosives all day long. She lacked a sense of security and wouldn't listen to anyone's advice. So, she simply hid the explosives in a very obvious location. Naturally, no one dared to touch them. You want me to open the explosives? Blast open the ropes? Grim kept nodding. She was doing her best to lift up her skirt, and her gaze was fixed on the shortest of all the explosives. That was the extremely small amount of gunpowder that could be used right now. 3 datura grass, 2 cursed ghosts, and these precious mushrooms. They should be delicious. I gritted my teeth as I looked at the witches who were happily stirring a large pot of medicinal soup. That rainbow-colored mushroom was obviously a super poisonous substance. Judging from what she was saying, Amelia was clearly delirious. She's completely unreasonable when she's crazy. Let's go all out. And so, I could only use my chin to support myself as I slowly moved my head under Grimm's skirt. Why did I sound so perverted? Fine, I should rephrase it. I was doing my best to move my mouth towards a certain location on the little girl's thighs. Fine, that was even more perverted. I might as well not say anything. When my white thighs appeared in front of me, I felt dizzy. I felt like a brand new dark history was about to appear. But, at this point, it wasn't the time to hesitate. If someone discovered that my head was under her skirt, and news of my action of licking her thighs spread, my reputation would be completely ruined. Roland, what are you doing? I paused in surprise when I heard this. Wasn't this Eliza's voice? I then stuck my head out, and as expected, the person who greeted me was my furious demon girlfriend. I was worried that something had happened to you. I've always wondered why you suddenly took in an adopted daughter. So it was because you wanted to play as an Onababa. Asterisk boom. Asterisk fine, this time, I wasn't beaten up by someone else. Since Eliza was here, at least my life was saved. However, my current appearance was far too embarrassing. I didn't know how to explain it, so I simply knocked my head against the wall and fainted. When I woke up from my deep sleep in a daze, I heard Eliza and Amelia's conversation. You're saying that I'm creating a magic potion? Hee, look, this is my self-created magic potion cooking technique. See, isn't this quite convenient? There's no need for messy step. All you need to do is add the ingredients, cook it, and you can eat it. This surgery will take at least 10 hours, and there's no way to stop it in the middle. I need to prepare dinner and supper first. What's that green thing? It looks so disgusting. Green dragon meat. Although it's a little tough, it's still delicious. Is it delicious? It's super delicious. All you need to do is cook it, and the deliciousness will overflow. How about you give it a try? Detect poison. I mercilessly cast a spell that detected poison. Unsurprisingly, I saw a pitch-black glow that represented poison. I'm sorry. I forgot that you probably can't eat poison. For me, food is something I'm used to enjoying. The more poisonous the ingredients, the more delicious they are. I'm able to survive just by photosynthesizing, so it's impossible for poison to enter my bloodstream. This soup is good for nourishing my skin, but I forgot that you're still a fragile creature and almost poisoned you to death. I'm so sorry. Although she said she was sorry, judging from Amelia's expression, it was obvious that her apology wasn't sincere at all. However, Eliza wasn't willing to be outdone. She took the pitch-black soup in one gulp and drank it all in one gulp. It's so disgusting. With such cooking skills, I think I understand why you've never been able to get married. Disgusting? You dare to insult my cooking skills? It's clearly nutritious and delicious. There must be something wrong with your sense of taste. Why don't we find a third party to evaluate it and see how it tastes? For example, that bastard Lullicon who just stuck his head under a little girl's skirt, that pervert who's clearly awake but still pretending to be asleep and eavesdropping, and that bastard pervert who just took in an adopted daughter and then secretly turned into a ghost father. If looks could kill, I would have already been cut into pieces. Judging from Amelia's eager expression, it was highly likely that she would be forced to drink this nourishing soup. I didn't have the ability to be immune to poison like these two. Although I probably wouldn't die in the end, who wouldn't be able to take a stomach wash for no reason? Asterisk clack. Asterisk, and so, I unhesitatingly slammed into her. This time, I didn't hold back at all. At the very least, I definitely didn't intend to wake up before the surgery was completed. Why don't you become my adopted daughter in the future? I was used to planning before taking action, so how could I possibly say something so casual? Actually, there really was a reason why I took in Grimm as my adopted daughter. We definitely can't allow Gleena and Renee to become Cavendish's vessels again. Any information leaking from them must be stopped immediately. Although Cavendish helped us this time, it was mainly because he wanted to punish Rose for crossing the line. I really didn't have the slightest confidence that he would stand on the other side next time. And the two descendants of the mist were obviously incredibly important. If they were dragged into the demon abyss, it would definitely result in irreparable losses. Obviously, the most important thing was to quickly deal with the problem of the demonkin in their bodies. Otherwise, if my information kept leaking, whether or not my plan would succeed would probably depend on Cavendish's mood. Powerful demons treat their direct bloodline as their personal property. From a certain standpoint, it's not wrong. The summoning of the bloodline is impossible to resist, and there's a huge difference between Cavendish and Rene, which makes any method of resistance useless. But it's not completely impossible. There were quite a few demonkin in this world, and the mage's research on them was quite mature. There really was a trick that could remove the ancestral demon's control over their descendants. For the demonkin, the reins are tied to their souls. Unless they die, it's impossible to remove them. And if they really die, their souls will most likely be dragged down to hell by the reins. But we can change the person holding the reins. As long as their powers come from the same source, we can think of a way to cover them up. For example, if there's a descendant of the Inferno demons, we can inject a demon lord's bloodline into the descendant and use a blood exchange method to turn the descendant into a double demonkin. Then, the stronger demon lord's bloodline will naturally be able to suppress the Inferno demon's bloodline, which is equivalent to removing the Inferno demon's control over the descendant. And after that, as long as we get rid of the demon lord, we will have nothing to worry about. I had to admit that this was quite a genius idea. It perfectly utilized the demonization ability of the demon lord's bloodline and the law of the jungle. But here, I met with a small problem. I have no way of finding a demon with a higher rank than Cavendish. He's an Abyss Prince. Theoretically speaking, only the Chaos Abyss itself has a higher rank than him. Even if we find a demon stronger than him, it probably won't be of any use. Besides, we won't be able to deal with a demon stronger than him. But from a certain standpoint, we still found a solution that wasn't really a solution. Since we can't force the main reins to change directions, then let's try to see if we can redirect them to a tributary. My soul wavelengths were incredibly similar to Cavendish's. If I transformed into a demon, my demonic blood should be of the same origin as his. Actually, if we only looked at the power level, my original Sin Demon God form wouldn't be any weaker than the Chaos Abyss Prince's. Since my demonic blood was of the same origin, it was even possible for the reins to mistake me for its master. And once it locked onto me, I naturally wouldn't let go. Then, I would change my bloodline. Perhaps I would be able to cut off my connection with Cavendish. This sounded quite complicated, and there were many theoretical problems, but it was actually quite simple to do. All I needed to do was activate my original Sin Demon God form and transform into a demon of the Chaos faction. Then, I would transfuse my blood. If everything went smoothly, I would be able to turn Gleena from Cavendish's descendant into Roland's descendant through a special magical ritual. Of course, since they were twins, there was actually no difference at all on a genetic level. From a certain standpoint, since my blood flowed through her veins, she would indeed become a blood-related relative of mine. This was also the main reason why I suggested for Gleena to become my adopted daughter in order to discard all my other worries. At this moment, I couldn't help but smile as I looked at Gleena, who was sleeping soundly next to me. I mysteriously obtained a descendant. Is this what it feels like to have a family? Wait a moment, this isn't right. Why am I so happy? I'm clearly still a single man, yet I mysteriously obtained a blood-related daughter as well as a bunch of naughty children. Smack. Suddenly, a bottle landed next to my ear. The black, sticky liquid inside was so familiar. Wasn't this the beauty soup from earlier? Amelia worked hard to make it. Please don't waste it. Drink it while it's hot. Asterisk smack smack. Asterisk there was nothing else behind me. This time, I was stopped before I could even touch her. It would seem that it would be quite difficult for me to repeat the same trick for the third time. The cook Amelia's face was now black from the smoke, but she still had a smile on her face as if she was quite proud of herself. Don't be in such a hurry. Drink it slowly. There's still a lot in the pot. Does it taste good? This dragon tiger flavored thick soup was specially prepared for you. Countless bubbles appeared on the cauldron. The twisted skull that suddenly floated to the surface of the water, together with the pitch-black liquid in front of me, made me feel incredibly disgusted. Master, the stomach lavage equipment has been prepared. There's no need for Lady Amelia to wait for long. Relax, after you die, I'll go to the river Styx and ask for your opinion. You're already assuming that I'll die? How unfortunate. Chapter 200. I've been single for half my life, and now I finally have a daughter to take care of. What a pity, what a joyous occasion. Asterisk boom. Asterisk boom. Asterisk I really wanted to say that, but if the background was a sea of flames and I could hear explosions, then I might as well forget about it. It's a pity, but congratulate my sister. Isn't this girl getting too excited? Should I say that Cavendish and I were worthy of being twins? Our bloodlines didn't clash at all, and under Amelia's guidance, the blood exchange went quite smoothly. There were no adverse reactions that I had expected. There weren't even any allergic reactions or reactions that would normally occur with a normal blood transfusion. Currently, a third of Grimm's bloodline had already been infused with my bloodline, and when I faintly sensed that mystical bloodline connection, I used my will to cancel the demonization and give Gleena her freedom. Gleena, who had been demonized for so many years, finally took off her blindfold and walked out of her binding armor without any qualms. Of course, it was impossible for a tumor that had already worsened to disappear naturally. Under the current conditions, it was impossible for the demonized portion to disappear. However, this girl with different colored eyes wasn't someone who cared about others' gazes. As long as her demonic eyes weren't shining with that dim yellow evil light from the chaos abyss that constantly dragged her soul into chaos, she was quite willing to take off her blindfold and show off her youthful vigor under the sunlight. You're just too energetic. I only told you to clean up the rubble, not to level it. A new city, a new street, and a new plan. Since I intended to create a megacity, then the rubble left behind by the battle would have to be cleaned up. Originally, I had intended to be an expert in construction and slowly clean up the rubble, but Gleena, who still didn't want to return to Antoon, volunteered to give this task to her. Considering that this would save me some money, I naturally didn't refuse. Considering her past history, I had expected that she would go overboard. But since the rubble was already in ruins, going overboard would be fine. This would also allow her to vent some of the energy that she had recently gone overboard. However, it was evident that I had still underestimated her. The old mechanical parts on the battlefield became raw materials. With her status as the Queen of Slewir, the remaining energy furnaces of the abandoned Titan giants were used as raw materials. One by one, the powerful fixed-point bombs were built, forming a tight explosive network. Then, boom! I pressed the red button for detonation, and half of the city was sent flying into the sky. The tremendous explosion destroyed all the glass windows. The demolition that would have taken 2 months was completed in a single day. From a certain standpoint, I had once again underestimated Grimm's fanaticism towards explosions. Alright, I'll admit defeat. At least it's better to find trouble with the building than with me. From a certain standpoint, this ritual was the equivalent of establishing the strongest blood relationship possible. I didn't know how to deal with this new, adopted daughter that suddenly appeared. It was likely that Grimm didn't know how to deal with his new father either. Previously, Antoon would occasionally call me adopted father, or something like that, and most of it was just a joke. But now, she didn't say anything at all. It was likely that she didn't even know what to call me. Perhaps your way of expressing your feelings is rather unique. Even if you can't normally hug me or act spoiled, don't you think using an exploding alarm clock to wake me up is a bit too much? Waking up every day is a race against my life. If I'm any slower, I'll die, you bastard. By the way, I should mention that after that incident, I received my system's belated blessing as usual. A daughter who isn't related to you by blood calls you father, and you're still an old virgin. You meet all the requirements. Congratulations on obtaining the achievement, being a happy father, and the honorary title King of Spare Tires. After equipping this title, it will be easier for you to obtain sympathy from women and friendship from men. This was actually quite pitiful, but as always, my system added insult to injury at lightning speed. Actually, you can consider going one step further. Gather 7 daughters who aren't related to you by blood and still maintain their virginity. Then, you can complete the task of raising beautiful girls. Depending on how well you complete this task, you can obtain the 3 epic achievements of being a happy father-lover, legendary king of fathers, and veteran nanny father. Finally, you can obtain the epic title of You're the Ultimate Good Man. This will greatly increase your friendship with women, and also greatly increase the difficulty of obtaining love. Of course, if you plan on going down the path of being a demon, don't hesitate. I still have the Onababa series of titles that I guarantee will be powerful enough. Waff, I'm not the king of spare tires. I don't want to be a father god. At that time, even I, who had long since become numb to the fact that my system had been scammed for so many years, could only helplessly lie on the ground with tears in my eyes. The system added insult to injury. Actually, you've basically completed this achievement. Renee, Glena, Eliza, and not to mention that it's impossible for your physical body to reach adulthood in the short term. Stop struggling. You can't resist fate. Looking at it from a different perspective, being a legend father god is actually quite awesome. At least. Fine, the system can't find anything good about it, so I'll just directly express my sympathy and condolences to you. So many naughty children. Father God, you've worked hard. Where should I start commenting from? Should I start from when even the damned system admitted that it was intentionally adding insult to injury? Or should I start from when I became a legend father? Or should I start from when the system was so pitiful that it couldn't bear to continue commenting and instead turned around to express sympathy? By the way, I also received another achievement on that day. You voluntarily ate highly poisonous food and didn't die. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the achievement. Hungry don't care what you eat. After equipping this achievement, your appetite will be doubled, and your resistance to poison and disgusting food will be slightly increased. This series of achievements also includes Food God, Nothing Taboo, we'll eat anything with 4 legs apart from chairs, Stargazing is so delicious, and so on. After completing all of these, you will receive the epic achievement, The Man Who Stands at the Top of the Food Chain, and the legend title, Bay Devourer of the Void. Actually, with Amelia here, you could have easily achieved this. Keep up the good work? After eating those things, I really did see the river Styx. Those bastards even said to me, "You're here again? How long do you intend to stay here for?" The next time I eat those things, I'll really be staying here forever. Fine then, let's forget about the past. Right now, the most important thing was to find someone to take revenge on. You're such a scammer. When half of the entire city went up into the sky, as the person in charge of this project, I finally managed to get rid of all the complaints and documents and deal with a large number of accidents caused by being frightened. I angrily went to find Glena to take revenge, but the result was that before I could even complain to her face, I discovered an unexpected battle. In an empty area, Renee and Glena were currently fighting. Sword energy was everywhere and explosions were everywhere. Judging from the power of the battle, it was obvious that both of them were serious. Unlike before, the demon prince's bestowment was no simple one. The highest quality chaos transformation gave Renee far too much power. Cavendish was worried that his descended body would mysteriously die, so he directly gave Renee a large amount of combat experience that came from her instincts. Her bug-like soul imprint also gave her a comprehensive increase in power. The current Renee was one of the top even among veteran legend rank individuals. Although she was still unable to release sword energy, Roland's sacred sword sliced through the air like a silver dragon. Every time she attacked, she would have the power to collapse the heavens. Her sword pressure and aura were like an ever-increasing gravity that suppressed her opponent's ability to move. Actually, as the battle progressed, her seal of infinite courage was being activated. Her power level was indeed increasing. After the bloody battle on that snowy night, the current Night Princess seemed to have finally obtained the sacred sword's recognition. She's even formed her own combat style? It seems that she won't be far from becoming completely independent. I had personally taught Renee. Although Cavendish had interfered, her growth was still within expectations. However, I was completely unable to understand Gleena. What astonished me the most was that although it seemed like Renee was in control of the battle with her sacred sword, and Gleena had less and less space to dodge, she was actually the one in control of the battle's tempo. Although Gleena was petite and nimble without her heavy armor, she was still born with tremendous strength. She wielded a weapon in each hand. Her halberd moved like the wind, while her sword moved like lightning. They didn't interfere with each other and worked together as if they were two weapon masters working together. She's still only at the gold rank? But suddenly, Gleena's skirt slid down, and a round goblin grenade dropped down. The lit fuse was about to run out. Renee paused in surprise for a moment before hurriedly jumping back. However, the fuse had run out and nothing happened. Boom. The gunpowder from Gleena's grenade palm dissipated along with the smoke. After putting some distance between them, Gleena unhesitatingly tossed away her heavy melee weapons. Now, it was time for her to use firepower. She would toss out all her muskets and explosives. I suddenly discovered that although Gleena was stuck at the gold rank, she was definitely no ordinary gold rank. She had reached the master gold level in both long and short weapons. She was also a master in engineering, and her overall strength far surpassed that of a legend. She also had excellent piloting skills. She was a rare all-rounder. The most important part was that she had plenty of combat experience. In front of the experienced Gleena, Renee was still nothing more than a rookie. Gleena completely predicted Renee's movements and attacked first, suppressing her at every turn. Renee's attacks were relatively simple and direct, while Gleena's attacks were numerous and didn't need to be repeated. Once one side figured out the other's trump cards, Gleena began to use her full strength, and the battle began to turn around. Under normal circumstances, Gleena would definitely win, but Renee has that. In the end, Renee will definitely win. As expected, Renee seemed to notice that I had arrived. Perhaps it was because she was unable to accept the pressure, but in the end, she still raised her sacred sword. Return, kings. All right, there was no need to say anything else. The kings of Valkyrie descended, and Gleena was instantly sent flying by 3 sword energies. The battle was over. Renee had won and Gleena was left to sulk. That's right, 3 sword energies instead of 1. After that battle, Roland's sacred sword completed its transformation into a god equipment. There weren't many other changes, but the limit of summoning 3 kings of Valkyrie per day had been changed. You can summon 4 Valkyrie per day, at most 3 at a time. If you go all out and summon 12 kings of Valkyrie at once, you're such a scoundrel. Renee dispelled Valkyrie, while Gleena ran over to my side. Before I could even complain, she reached out her hand. It's mine. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It turned out that Gleena was quite displeased that she lost. She felt that it was unfair of me to give the sacred sword to Renee, so she was trying to make up for it. Ha, you can only blame your weapon if you can't win. How impatient. In that case, Renee, throw down your sacred sword and we'll fight again. Humph, why wouldn't I use the god equipment I have? If you're displeased, go ask Roland for his god equipment. As she said that, she began to laugh. God equipment was something that could only be found by luck. Even she didn't believe that Roland had any more. I do have some, and I was just about to give it to you. As I said such inconceivable words, I stuffed a black dagger into Glena's hands. I'll give this god equipment to protect you, but you definitely can't let anyone know about it, and you definitely can't use it to harm your friends. Otherwise, you'll regret it. Felix's remorse. Dagger. God equipment. Attack power, 1 to 3. Choose one of the following 4 special effects for each attack. The dagger's blade will be infused with the corresponding light. Divine Right. Nature's End. Anyone struck by this dagger will be infused with aging poison. No matter if it's a living creature or a plant, even if it's a rock, it will reach the end of its lifespan in advance. Green Light. Divine Right. Life Distortion. When this effect is activated, the target will be infused with a strange hormone, causing them to mutate for a short period of time, changing their form and species. There is a 10% chance that it will be a beneficial mutation, causing them to become even stronger. There is a 30% chance that it will be a harmful mutation, causing them to become weaker. The rest is an insignificant mutation. Red Light. Divine Right. Poison God's Hatred. When this effect is activated, the target will be infused with an incurable mixture of poisons, causing them to fall into eternal slumber. Black Light. Divine Right. Felix's Redemption. When this effect is activated, the target will be infused with an antidote. All 3 of the above effects will be dispelled. However, the prerequisite for this is that the first 3 effects must be activated. There's a line of yellow words on the back of the dagger. My dagger is covered in fatal poison. Lick, it's poisonous. This was an ordinary-looking black iron dagger. It was so simple and unadorned that even a novice thief wouldn't be interested in it. However, it was indeed a god equipment. Felix, who had devoured the forest guardian god's divine power, had immediately died as soon as he ascended to the divine throne. The divine power he left behind had been transformed by the system into this poisonous dagger, which was also the greatest spoil of victory in this divine war. I had done experiments before. When the green light's natural end effect was activated, plants would instantly die, while animals would become middle-aged with 1 slash, old with 2 slashes, and die of old age with 3 slashes. The red light's mutation was even worse. There was a normal chance of a mutation occurring, which was a complete mutation of a species. I personally witnessed a mutated white rabbit swallow a wild boar in 1 gulp. The black light, which was the most fatal of all, was simple. 1 slash and the target would fall into eternal slumber. As for the only antidote, White Redemption, it required at least 3 sacrifices in order to be used. It required at least 3 lives to save 1 person. As expected of a god equipment, but what's the meaning of this attack power that's even weaker than a fruit knife's? In order to inject poison into the dagger, it should at least break the skin. How can such a blunt knife cut through my defense? I lightly sliced my arm with this dagger, but I didn't feel anything at all. My Titan body was directly immune to this bit of damage. And if I didn't see any blood, this god equipment dagger would be no different from a fruit knife. Normally speaking, powerful semi-god equipment and god equipment would all have very troublesome side effects. Perhaps this blunt knife itself was a type of limitation, which was why this god equipment had such a troublesome god equipment curse attached to it. However, its sharpness, which couldn't even pierce through leather armor, limited its usage. There's no need to think about direct combat, but it's a good item for sneak attack. If it's Glena, she should be able to use it to its fullest potential. Glena kept nodding her head after obtaining the god equipment dagger. Her icy little face finally started to smile, and that instant pure smile was incredibly cute. She then turned around and started showing off to Renee, as if she had obtained some important victory. However, this wasn't the time to be wasting time. I had more important matters to attend to. Get ready. The disaster relief team has already been assembled. Let's go to the elves together. Chapter 201. There were no victors in war. Unlike those legends and epics, war would only leave behind hatred and ruins, as well as a chain of hatred that would linger until the end of the world. Most normal people wouldn't like war, so why was there still war? Perhaps it was because of personal benefit. As long as there was no effective mechanism to resolve conflicts, plus there were ambitious people manipulating and fanning the flames from behind the scenes, there would be no end to this war. In this war that engulfed the entire Northlands, the Beastmen were fighting for their homeland, while the elves were fighting for their former glory. From their perspective, they weren't doing anything wrong. And looking at history as the ones who started this war, they were all the losers in previous wars. This war was no different from all previous wars, as they were all fighting for their own species' survival space. However, there were some things that couldn't be determined by right or wrong. No matter what reason they had for starting this war, this land of ice and snow had already been soaked in blood. Countless souls had cursed the gods and the invaders before they died. The relationship between the various races that had just thawed returned to the freezing point in this war. Someone has to pay the price. Settling accounts after the war seemed to have become an inevitable rule. The warmonger who failed would be dragged to the judges' stand to receive an absolutely unfair judgment. At such a time, even the most impartial judge would choose to be blind and sentence the criminal to death several dozen times over as the victims cried and roared in anger. All right, I knew that this was meaningless, but sometimes it was quite satisfying. Not only was this a way for the innocent to rest in peace, it was also a way for the survivors to vent their hatred. The sinners had to be judged, and this was the fastest way for the survivors to eliminate their hatred and return to a peaceful life. But this time, after the war ended, it was time for the usual settling of accounts. However, there was a small problem. In terms of losses, perhaps even Slowir, which suffered the worst losses, couldn't compare to the country that started this war. Over and over again, the Highland Beastmen lost the blood and flesh that they had accumulated for more than 100 years. It was obvious that they wouldn't be able to recover for a long time after the war. And since the Beastmen had a tradition of leading the charge, most of the Beastmen's leaders had died in this war. Kill those Beastmen bastards. We want revenge. What do you mean children and women are innocent? Didn't those Beastmen kill for them? They can kill our children and women, why can't we kill theirs? When the joy of surviving by a fluke dissipated, they looked at the devastated world. The survivors clamored to attack the plains, kill all the Beastmen, and completely annihilate the Beastman race. The grievances of the people were very troublesome, especially the grievances of those who had suffered the pain of war. Some things were very difficult to reason with. You could say, don't take the initiative to start a new war, and then talk about the consequences of starting a new war. All they needed to do was say, can't we take revenge? Why are they the only ones who can kill our people? Your efforts will be wasted. Even without the no-war principle, our country wouldn't be able to withstand a new war right now. The Beastmen of the Plains wouldn't just sit back and watch the humans carry out a massacre out of vengeance, would they? If the Highland Beastmen were allowed to do as they pleased, it would be a calamity for future generations. I indeed had a plan to deal with this, but now obviously wasn't the time to start a new conflict. Then find some sinners. It just so happens that there's a bunch of leftovers who are still committing crimes. Let's use them as an example to others. Perhaps it was worth rejoicing that the Beastmen didn't die out on that difficult night. Even among the Beastmen, not every single one of them was a warrior who didn't fear death. Many tribe leaders didn't bring their tribesmen into that meat-grinder-like city of death. Instead, they chose to escape under the cover of night. And when their return journey became incredibly difficult, they naturally became the most dangerous of bandits in order to survive. That was why I sent out all of my Aurora Night Warriors to hunt them down when the situation stabilized. And so, even though there weren't that many of them, they became the most dangerous enemies thanks to my propaganda. Camel Baba and the 40 Jackal Bandits, 3 female Tigermen, and 105 male Beastmen were already on my wanted list. But soon, they would be escorted in prison carts and paraded through the streets of every city. They would enjoy the insults and stones of the survivors. Finally, they would be judged based on their crimes and would most likely be hanged on the gallows. History had already proven that the moment the invaders failed, they would become the most pitiful species in the war. Their territories would be occupied, and revenge would definitely come. Nobody would pity them for their losses in the war because they deserved it. They were both the victims of the war, as well as the instigators of the war. Apart from these tangible and intangible things, out of consideration for the future, the victors would not give the losers a chance to rise again. All kinds of harsh treaties would inevitably swarm in, and the originally arrogant invaders, as the losers, would have to agree to the harshest conditions in order to survive in the world. And these harsh conditions and humiliating conditions would often lead to conflicts in the future, which would eventually lead to a new round of war. And so, I was especially careful in dealing with the Beastmen after the war. Even though I already had a contingency plan, I still invited my advisors to discuss it repeatedly. Under my signal, my advisors spoke up one by one, but they were all useless. Things like restricting trade, cutting off the supply routes, forcing the Beastmen to hand over hostages and war reparations, and so on. I was already drowsy from listening to them. Restricting trade? Even if they wanted to trade, would there still be any merchant caravans traveling between the two sides? It would be strange if they weren't treated as spies and killed. Cutting off the supply routes? Let's first redraw the map that Umdarokan made meaningless. Forcing the Beastmen to hand over hostages and reparations? At least do your homework. There are so many Beastmen tribes out there, and you want them to hand over hostages and reparations? If you push them too far, it'll be another calamity. But when my advisor named Pylab spoke up, I immediately woke up, startled awake. The ancient chieftain system needs to be abolished. Only a republic can save the world. In order to completely eliminate all conflicts and wars, we need a great revolution to eradicate the ancient and ignorant authoritarian system. My advisor's previous uncreative speech made me want to sleep, but this advisor's speech was quite creative. But to abolish the foundational feudal monarchy system of this world? This advisor was quite daring. More than 70% of the countries in Ike were monarchies. Wasn't he afraid of being burned at the stake for such an extreme? Chop off the heads of those selfish chieftains and create a brand new social system. Allow the foolish beastmen to also create their own efficient new republic. That way, I couldn't help but size up this rather gentle young man. He was so worked up that his spittle flew everywhere, his fists were clenched tightly, and his eyebrows were furrowed. It was as if his body was filled with endless flames of anger. He was quite similar to the legendary revolutionaries in the novels. But for him to say such unrealistic and far-fetched words in a feudal era, I was even beginning to wonder if he was a transmigrator. Then we can ask them for war reparations and hostages. Alright then, I take back what I just said. This guy was nothing more than a madman. After all, he was still trying to obtain war reparations and hostages? My apologies, my lord. Pylab's just isn't in a good state at the end. He just suffered a setback in his relationship, got dumped, and had his head smashed by a rock. Recently, he's been a little. My advisor shook his index finger and then pointed at Pylab's head, indicating that something was wrong. Pylab's then seemed to become even more worked up. His colleagues hurriedly pulled him down, deeply afraid that he would say something even more ridiculous. You rotten remnants of feudalism will never be able to defeat the holy bourgeois warriors. The heads of the foolish kings will fall to the ground one by one, and the great republic will rise. This will be a storm, a great storm that nobody will be able to avoid. You idiots! All right then, Pylob's comrade finally gagged his mouth. He quieted down a little as he was dragged out, but he still fiercely struggled. Shut up! Don't bite me! I'm trying to help you, don't bite me! Cough, it seems that our advisor is under too much pressure and needs some time to rest. Give him half a year of leave, and if he still hasn't rested enough, give him another half a year. Although I said this, the conference room remained silent. I knew that if this continued, there wouldn't be any results, so I could only toss out my own plan. Didn't Anya say that her tribe also wants to come to the surface? Actually, the highlands are a good place, at least much better than the pitch-black underground. Let them come. Our participation will only worsen the conflict. The beastmen have their own rules, and it's best to let the beastmen deal with the beastmen themselves. I talked for several hours, but in the end it was still the same. And after this issue was resolved, the second problem was even more of a headache. Elves? That's really troublesome. If I had to choose the unluckiest side in this battle, the elves would definitely be the best choice. The guardian god had died, and the main armies of the 4 northern kingdoms of the elves had all been annihilated. Although the Tassel Kingdom still had a certain amount of combat strength, all of its royal family members had died, and it was hard to say whether or not their combat strength could even be considered elves. From a certain standpoint, the Tassel Kingdom royal family was one of the main culprits. However, the previous elven king had already perished together with Felix, and punishing the Banshee Swana, who had always been anti-war, would be even more unjustified. And this wasn't even the biggest problem. The biggest problem was the sudden change in the current living environment. The self-sustaining ecosystem that had existed for thousands of years had been broken, and the fatal climate had transformed into the harshest challenge to life. Currently, most of the residents were still fighting for survival. Forget it, let's not think about this anymore. Let's first focus on providing disaster relief. Otherwise, if everyone dies, talking about anything else will be pointless. The Borealis had already finished its preparations. Once it unloaded the ores obtained from the barbarian tribe, the second rescue team would arrive first. And I was a member of this rescue team. Chapter 202. After twisting the laws of nature for thousands of years, the northern elves finally suffered from nature's vengeance. The furious nature used a rapid rain of ice crystals to cleanse this country of sinners, while a dragon-like storm wreaked havoc on the land. The death of the ancient guardians took away the last green of hope. That sounded a little artistic, so let's just get straight to the point. After the natural barrier was broken, the two countries with vastly different climates came into contact with each other. The drastic temperature difference caused the air convection to accelerate and become unstable, forming natural disasters such as hail and tornadoes. The death of the forest guardian god increased the death of the natural vegetation, and the sandstorm also lost its shielding. Multiple natural disasters interacted with each other, causing the situation to become unsalvageable. If we don't do anything, the northern elves will probably perish. But I'm not willing to save them for nothing. This was the consensus reached by some human kingdoms. However, their rescue speed was incredibly fast. Or perhaps it should be said that their speed of stealing was incredibly fast. Although the secrets of magic had been passed down by the elves to the other species, as the species with the longest history of magic, many of their magical schools and secret spells were only passed down within the elven species. At the very least, they were ahead of the rest of the world in many aspects such as inscriptions, foreign languages, and nature mages. The human kingdoms had been coveting them for a long time. And even if it was accidentally leaked, the lucky ones who obtained it would mostly treat it as a secret and keep it for themselves. At the very least, the small kingdoms in the north had no chance of obtaining it. Although the other 3 northern elven kingdoms had suffered heavy losses, at least their royals were still around. Although their main armies had suffered heavy losses, they still had their own local armies and second-line armies. They were also capable of organizing themselves to save themselves and were also on guard against the humans. The other kingdoms of the elves were too far away and couldn't save them in time. However, they still existed. Although the elven gods were tempted, they didn't do anything. If they didn't personally come to save them, it would be no different from an invasion. If they went overboard, they would have to consider the chain reactions that would result. In fact, it was the sudden appearance of several dozen elven gods that directly ended the plans of the other kingdoms of the elves. Those elven gods were obviously reinforcements from the other kingdoms of the elves. Not only that, there were divine existences among them, which meant that the elven gods had begun to interfere. That was why Roland's aid to the 3 countries could only stop at making a fortune out of them. He would use the resources and rations that they lacked to get through the winter in exchange for gold, elven magic tools, and other hard currencies. As for the magical legacies and secrets that they had hidden away, Roland could forget about them. However, Tassel was different. The true god Rose's fall ritual had displayed her divine power, causing all the elves in this elven kingdom to become fallen elves with dark brown skin. Perhaps even their own species wouldn't recognize them. After all, compared to the surface elves, these Greyblood elves were much closer in appearance and characteristics to their underground cousins, the Dark Elves. Rose's move was very vicious. Basically, it was equivalent to cutting off the Tassel elves' way of returning to the surface elves. The Tassel elves who had nowhere else to go could only follow her. But when she suddenly fell, it directly caused the Tassel elves to fall into a desperate situation. The other kingdom of the elves hated the Tassel elves for their betrayal, and the humans hated the Tassel elves for starting the war. If the upper echelons of the Tassel kingdom were still around, they would most likely be of some use. But unfortunately, if they were still around, they would probably be directly dragged to the guillotine. Nothing was more convincing than the accusation of the soul of the murdered. When Swanna returned, the conspiracy hidden in the gutter was exposed to the public. The original Elven King was treated as an ambitious warmonger. And it was precisely this war that caused the fall of the Guardian Goddess, the extreme deterioration of living conditions, and the plummeting reputation of the royal family and nobles. Not to mention that most of the Tassel elves' descendants had died in this war. The Tassel kingdom was completely unable to organize any rescue efforts for its own citizens. If it weren't for the fact that the other kingdom of the elves were also suffering from the war, they might have already mobilized their armies for revenge, not to mention rescue. After asking for help from the kingdom of the elves several times but getting rejected, the Tassel elves could only helplessly ask for help from the neighboring kingdom of Slúir in order to survive. Even though the Tassel elves had just recently been at war, and even though most of the Tassel elves' executioners had died in battle, the blood feud still existed. As a result, the Tassel elves didn't have much hope in asking for help. However, Slúir agreed. Although Queen Gleena didn't send any reinforcements out of consideration for her own citizens' feelings, she opened the door to other human countries, allowing them to carry out her rescue mission. As for the rescue teams, that came uninvited from various countries, under the call of an alliance, they also began to rescue. Although these rescue teams were quite selfish, and were no different from robbers who robbed homes while saving people, they did indeed save many Greyblood elves who were on the brink of death. And among these rescue teams, the most eye-catching one was a relatively remote small country, Donglan. Knight Princess Renée, who had become famous in this war, personally led the rescue team. All the believers of the Church of Law were mobilized, and they weren't rescuers like those robbers. Instead, they were truly here to save people. Every time they went to a place, they would distribute resources, search for elves who were suffering from the disaster, set up temporary residences for the refugees, and carry out emergency rescue work according to requests. Repaying evil with good? I don't think you're such a good person. Of course I'm not that foolish. It's just that I'm not as short-sighted as them. What do you think they'll be able to gain from the refugees' gazes, as if they were thieves? Our goal wasn't that simple from the very start. Soon, when the refugees began to move, my words were confirmed and my choice was rewarded. Amidst the endless calamities, the royalty of Donglan lost its authority, and the neighboring countries were eyeing us with hostility, ready to take revenge. The calamities transformed what should have been a livable country into a living hell. No matter whether they admitted it or not, the tassel country was beginning to disintegrate. At this time, while the elven countries closed their doors, many human countries opened their doors to the Greyblood elves who were trying to immigrate here. However, more than 90% of the migrating elves chose to immigrate to Donglan. This great migration would change many things. At the very least, they would bring countless books and knowledge with them. That's right, this was my goal. It wouldn't be meaningful to take advantage of the elves' misfortune, but as long as I could obtain the elves, I would naturally obtain everything. Apart from Donglan's rising reputation, the elves' choice was mostly due to the Donglan Principality's excellent reputation. Not only did Donglan not interfere with the elven slave trade, it was also a country that strictly prohibited the practice of slavery. Every other country had elven slaves. In order not to suddenly become someone else's property overnight, coupled with what they had personally witnessed recently, any elf with a normal intelligence would make this choice. Since the situation was developing, I also tried to convince Swana that rather than stubbornly holding on in a neighboring country that was filled with hostility, it would be better for the entire elven species to migrate. Otherwise, even if they survived this winter, what would they do next winter? As long as they were free, it was likely that the petty elven gods would immediately begin dealing with Tassel's betrayal. The three Northlands kingdoms of the elves would be more than happy to act as the vanguard. I didn't think that Gleena would be able to completely stop Slowir's revenge. When a country reached such a state, it was also time for it to end. Go ahead and migrate. In this land, Donglan is probably the only country that hasn't suffered any losses in this war that can truly accept you all. You've all seen the reputation that they've accumulated over the years. Now they worship the law god as their national religion, and all species have equal civil rights. Even the sinless, undead, can live under the sun. Naturally, you elves can as well. Swana didn't immediately respond to me, but I didn't continue to urge her to make a decision. However, I knew that she would definitely agree in the end. As long as we gathered all the information, if the Tassel Greyblood elves didn't want to perish, then the path that I offered would be the best choice. She could only choose the path that I expected. The truth was right in front of her. I indeed had my own selfish motives, but she would still choose the path that I expected, because this was the only path to survival. Without a doubt, this was an obvious scheme. It was only a matter of time before Swana agreed. Before that, I would patiently organize a rescue mission to show her sincerity. During this rescue mission, even though the berserk weather made it impossible to use any small airships apart from the Borealis, the Aurora Knight and elite warriors still left a deep impression on the elves. Many elves became famous because of this. Aurora Wings, Angel Wings, gigantic mountain rescue airship, valiant Dragonslayer princess, even though she has a strange sexual orientation. Not only did this increase Donglan's reputation, it also gave the elves hope for Donglan. It was likely that as long as Swana made the final decision and called for everyone to migrate, the Great Migration would go quite smoothly. Of course, there were also some things that made me not know whether to laugh or cry. Eternal Friends of the Centaurs? What's that? Oh, that's Lord Bafing's new title. Didn't the forest centaurs of the Tassel Kingdom lose their homes due to the destruction of a large number of forests? However, those stubborn tribe leaders are unwilling to leave their homes even at the brink of death. They're about to meet a calamity. Lord Beifong has made his move. I couldn't blame the tribe leaders for being stubborn. As far as I knew, the forest centaurs and the rainbow deer tribe were all subordinates of the forest god. Perhaps they had signed some sort of contract and were unable to leave. But right now I was completely distracted by another matter. When did Beifong become a lord? Judging from his words, it was obvious that this servant was biased. And considering that he was a half-beastman from the Cheryl tribe, it was likely that he had already been killed by Beifong. So, I turned around and asked another human servant about this. What did he do? Forget about the 18 forbidden ones. I don't want to know anything. I heard that the forest centaurs were planning on waiting for their deaths, so Lord Beifong and Cassio went to their door and challenged those stubborn tribe leaders based on ancient customs. Not only that, they've been winning every battle thanks to their outstanding strength. As long as they defeat a few more venerable tribe leaders, they'll be able to lead the forest centaurs out of the forest. Oh my, he's doing quite well. I was rather astonished. As far as I knew, Beifong seemed honest and straightforward, but he actually never did anything that didn't benefit him. I never expected that he would be working so hard to save them. Pa. On a recliner by the side, Eliza suddenly closed a thick cookbook. She adjusted her glasses and gave me a hint. The forest centaur's favorite sport is wrestling. If it's an ancient tradition, most of them would strip naked and wrestle under a small stream or waterfall. Most of the centaur chieftains are strong and muscular men. Roland explained. All right, I was unable to comment on this. After hesitating for a moment, I could only squeeze out a sentence. Well done. What else could I say? No matter what, being able to save the elves and their allies was a good thing that would increase Donglan's reputation. As long as Beifong's selfish motives weren't exposed, I had no need to stop him. On the contrary, I had to support him. But keep an eye on that bastard. Don't let him do anything crazy. It's already dangerous enough to let Beifong enter a forest filled with animals. And those centaurs. Ugh, I recalled the look in his eyes when he saw Cassio for the first time. As expected, I should have killed him back then. If he does something scandalous this time, no, he definitely has already done it. I should say, if the scandalous news gets out. The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. I slammed the table and stood up. No. I have to hurry and stop him. I can't allow him to ruin Donglan's reputation. However, just as I roared righteously, I was stopped. There's no rush. Leave after lunch. Who knows what shocking things he'll do? It'll be too late after lunch. Amelia worked so hard to make lunch. You should at least eat 2 bites. Of course it would be too late. However, it wasn't because the centaurs would be too late. Rather, based on my experience over the past few days, I would have to go to the river Styx again after lunch. If I didn't find an excuse to sneak away now, it would really be too late. No, I probably won't be able to go anywhere after lunch. You can't go anywhere even if you don't eat. I spent a lot of effort to teach Amelia how to cook. I knew that you definitely didn't have good intentions when you taught Amelia how to cook. From the moment you took away that dark fatal cooking compendium, I predicted that this day would come. Dark fatal cooking compendium? This isn't a classic British cuisine. Although I don't know what country Britain is, their cooking methods are indeed unique and innovative. Plus, it's easy to learn, so it's really convenient for Amelia to practice. Yeah, it's really simple. There are only 2 ways to cook it. Either you bake it in the oven or you cook it in a pot. You don't add any seasoning when cooking, and you just add whatever you like when eating. It's really original. This method is already ridiculous enough, but with Amelia's magic pot, it's already prepared. I spent a lot of effort on today's main dish, so please look forward to it. Suddenly, Amelia's voice came from behind me. I turned around and saw a gigantic fish head facing the sky. Its open mouth was still filled with spittle, and its large, lifeless eyes seemed to be complaining about its pitiful fate. The famous British dish, stargazing. Of. At that moment, a strong urge to vomit rose up from my stomach. It would have been fine if it was only the famous British dish, but Amelia added a new understanding to it. Isn't this a demonic fish? It's a super dangerous demonic creature, a highly intelligent creature that's extremely difficult to deal with. Isn't it a special product of the underground river? How did you get it? Yep, it's actually still alive. You actually killed me to cook? I curse you, I curse you, I curse your descendants. Amelia smiled proudly as she suddenly retracted her fist that had knocked the fish unconscious. Didn't the cookbook say that the most important thing is the original taste of the ingredients? The higher the quality of the ingredients, the better. The demonic fish must taste good. Then, it must be the freshest when it's alive. Yep, delicious. Not only that, Amelia even personally tasted the taste. It hurts, my cheeks are gone. Don't eat my eyeballs. I actually heard the curse of a vegetable that had been cut in half. This strange scene became more and more horrifying, and I didn't know what to say anymore. I could only carefully retreat and try to find a way to escape. However, an even more horrifying conversation came from behind me. That's great, now we have the ingredients for dinner. Sensei, what are we going to make for dinner? Although I feel much more confident after making this dish, I think it's better to make it simpler. It's even simpler than the British dish. We're going to make a Japanese dish, sashimi. Simpler than directly throwing it into a pot and cooking it? Doesn't that mean we can eat it directly after cutting it up? That's right, that's how the dish is. All right, before the conversation became even more horrifying, I had already escaped. But from this moment onwards, I decided to eat outside until the end. Chapter 203. This was quite effective in providing disaster relief to the Northland's elves. From a certain standpoint, disaster relief was also the best platform for military strength and organization. Unknowingly, the Donlon Principality had already displayed sufficient strength. The Aurora Knight that could fly freely amidst hailstones, the Borealis that could ignore tornadoes, the gigantic engineering machines that could clean up rubble, and the incredibly adaptable 4 elemental swordcasters were all the best examples of the Donlon Principality's strength. They also added to the Donlon Principality's strength to become the future leader of the Mist Alliance. The arrival of another group of reinforcements was something that nobody expected. Their arrival greatly increased the speed of the rescue operation. However, there was a small problem. These reinforcements were residents of the underground, the most evil existences the Holy Church had ever heard of. In the previous battle, and Galen had established a certain level of friendship with Swana. This time, when she received a request for reinforcements, she unhesitatingly organized her elite forces. Since the Dark Elves were still going berserk and the underground world wanted to control them, the underground lords were unable to send out their main forces. However, with their frighteningly abundant resources, it was already quite impressive that they only sent out their elite forces. Numerous gold and legend-ranked individuals joined the rescue operation. Not only did this greatly increase the speed of the rescue operation, it also made the other countries in the Northlands fearful of the underground's strength. The most eye-catching group, which could be said to be the cornerstone of the rescue operation, was a group of divine knights. They were the Dark Elves. That's right, in the entire world, only Sulphur Mountain City had such a group of Dark Elf Knights. The town security team was sent here to carry out the rescue operation. They were already skilled at guarding cities to begin with, and they had plenty of experience in dealing with all sorts of dangers. Carrying out search and rescue missions in ruins was basically their specialty. The lowest rank among them was the Silver Holy Knight and Law Knight, which made them excellent meat shields to begin with. The heavy enchanted armor that they had just been equipped with was the newest model of the year. As Sulphur Mountain City's only main force, City Lord and unhesitatingly gave them the best equipment. In the past, it was nothing for everyone to have a holy sword. But now that Sulphur Mountain City was rich, They were all equipped with full-body enchanted mithril heavy armor. Together with all sorts of gadgets created by the engineers, these female Night Galen completely ignored the hailstones and tornadoes. As city enforcement officers who had been working for many years, demolition and relocation were nothing difficult for them. They were used to dealing with disputes and explosions, so they were also good at dealing with ruin rescue missions. And when they discovered the injured, they still maintained a considerable number of holy knights and were able to treat the injured immediately. In a short period of time, their example spread throughout the entire disaster area. They're buried too deep and can't find the injured? 3 high-level holy knights. We'll fill the entire ruins with holy light. Let's save our lives first. She found the injured person behind the wall. She actually tore the wall open with her bare hands and used her body to block the falling rubble. She brought the injured person out unscathed. She's amazing. Sulphur Mountain City's town security was more than enough to take on the role of the royal guards of a mega-kingdom on the surface. Their equipment was so extravagant that even legends would be envious of them, and they could directly enter the role of the main character of an epic story. This elite squadron, armed to the teeth, used a rescue mission to display their strength, and it also caused those who were tempted to rein in their ambitions. And so, Sulphur Mountain City's elf knight group began to become famous. What? Is it the city security force? It must just be a cover. How could such a powerful knight group be used for security? And the one that left the deepest impression was that the warriors from Sulphur Mountain City suddenly clashed with Donglan's reinforcements. They even cornered the Church of Law's highest-ranking bishop, Shueti, in a corner and viciously beat him up. Yep, actually, the core of the Donglan reinforcements was a mercenary organization called the Gentleman Alliance. Just hearing this familiar name caused the town security to go berserk. You bastards, I left you alone for a while, and you actually increased in numbers. But since we're here, today shall be your doomsday. Shueti, you're a criminal. We've finally caught you again. Sisters, take care of them. All right, there were indeed people in the Gentleman Alliance who were difficult to accept, such as that clothes-shredding swordsman, but Lord Shueti was being wronged. Actually, he didn't do much. It was just that the Archbishop was worried about the suffering refugees, so he voluntarily took off his robe and underwear to protect them from the cold. Meanwhile, he only wore his underwear and insisted on providing disaster relief. Even though it was rather indecent, the Archbishop's muscular body had a masculine beauty to it. Plus, he was forced to do so by the circumstances, so no one thought too much about it. But obviously, these misophobic elves were completely unable to accept such behavior. They viewed him as a bad habit that was harmful to society, and that was going a little too far. Who doesn't know that the dark elves are indecent to begin with? Their thoughts must be too dirty, which is why they caused such a huge misunderstanding. In the eyes of biased people, the entire world is tilted. Their hearts are dirty, and they see everyone as dirty. In the end, under the indignation of the soldiers from other countries, Captain Yawn of the town security knight could only personally apologize. Fortunately, Lord Shueti was extremely magnanimous and forgave their rashness on the spot. But obviously, Yawn and the others didn't appreciate it. We actually had to lower our heads and apologize to that pervert. This is the worst experience in history. No, this is the second time. The first time was when that pervert actually became our superior, Yawn. But not even 2 days later, they committed another crime. Not only did they chase the legendary hunter Beifong of the Friends of the Centaurs like a rabbit, they even ganged up on this kind and honest person in front of everyone. In the eyes of the world, if Shueti's incident was pardonable, then the Draken Beifong who was ganged up and beaten up the moment they met was too much of an injustice. Do we need a reason to beat up Beifong? Then, let's punish him for the crime of Beifong. Perhaps such a reason would work in Sulphur Mountain City, but in the eyes of other observers, it seemed like they were taking advantage of their position to bully others. Did you hear that? Crime of Beifong, crime of Beifong? He clearly didn't do anything at all. Isn't this too much? You're going too far. Justice is in the hearts of the people. Perhaps the elven ladies still have some prejudice against me, Beifong. I can understand that, but perhaps they're under too much pressure. If beating me up can relieve their anger and dispel their prejudice, then come. Beifong. Herald's magnanimity only served to accentuate the elf knight's craziness and incomprehensibility. Listen to their resolution, they're practically saints. Sulphur Mountain City's town security night squad. Perhaps they have astonishing strength, but their magnanimity and character. They don't even have the slightest bit of Lord Shueti or Beifeng's. Tui. Alright, from a certain standpoint, it was just that the past that happened in Sulphur Mountain City was replaying itself. This time, the Gentleman Alliance had successfully toyed with the town's security, albeit at a price. Of course, if I appeared, I could indeed dispel these misunderstandings, but I would have to explain what happened underground and the truth behind Beifong and Shueti. After hesitating for a second, I made up my mind. After all, it wasn't the first time that the town security had been toyed with by the Gentleman Alliance. I should leave some face for the Church of Law and the Surface Gentleman Alliance mercenary squad. But soon, I didn't have the leisure to care about such small matters. Thanks to the underground autarch Anne's sincere persuasion, Swana also made up her mind to migrate her entire tribe. Their destination was Donglan, a vast but sparsely populated area. Sincere persuasion? And actually knows how to do this? Isn't she supposed to be a weakling with words? Just like Adam, she only knows how to use her fists to persuade others? What, you're finally enlightened. Just treat it as if it's true. Swana and the others are just finding a way out of this embarrassing situation. Let's leave some face for them. Actually, and had only casually mentioned, it seems that this place is uninhabitable. Why don't you go to the underground together with Anne? If you don't want to go, Domlon and Big Brother Roland would be fine as well. Obviously, such a casual invitation lacked sincerity. And what truly made Swana decide to gamble the fate of her entire tribe on the line wasn't something as abstract as sincerity. It seems that they feel that this ship is reliable enough, so they intend to board it. After sitting in this position, even Swana would have to abandon her personal feelings and place the interests of her tribe above all else. Right now, it was obvious that Swana had offended far too many people. Even if they managed to survive this crisis, it was inevitable that others would hit them while they were down. And since their species had changed, the elven gods couldn't count on them anymore. They needed to find a faction to rely on in order to continue surviving. Although they had long since decided that they needed to rely on another faction, the most important thing was to choose the right target. Otherwise, if the ship sank again, there would truly be no hope for them. If the other human kingdoms were able to display outstanding strength, perhaps the elves would have made other choices in the end. However, in this war and the disaster relief that followed, East Mist was undeniably the main character. Displaying strength and foundation was one thing, but the countless connections they had with the underground world, the new guiltless faction, the Church of Law, and so on were another important bargaining chip. The most important thing was the Mist Alliance's growing momentum of development and new technology, as well as the Mist Alliance project that was destined to sweep through the entire Northlands in the future. For a politician who prioritized the interests of his own people, it was quite obvious what choice he should make. All that was left was internal wrangling, and he would finally come up with a compromise that everyone could accept. Actually, Swana herself had put in a great deal of effort to make the elves, who had no sense of time and loved to endlessly argue, come to a decision so quickly. From a certain standpoint, she had her own thoughts as well. I'm an elf? Or an undead? Even though I'm clearly dead, I've become the living support. Perhaps Donglan, where only the guiltless exist, is the only home I can live in. I'm already tired. As long as my tribe can survive, I, the dead, need to find a place to rest. Due to that dishonorable incident that ignited the war, when the conspiracy was exposed, the Council of Elders, which originally had the highest authority in the world, suffered a calamity. The Elven King's accomplices, the elders behind the scenes, were all removed from their pedestals by the angry citizens. It was already quite fortunate that they were able to survive. Ironically, at the cost of her own death, Swanna achieved what her father had dreamed of and fought for half his life: complete control over the Tassel Kingdom. However, it was likely that the Tassel Kingdom would cease to exist in the near future. After the Great Migration, even the most optimistic of the Tassel Kingdom's grey-blood elves knew that no matter how kind Donglan was, it would be impossible for them to become part of China. If they stayed here for a short period of time, they could still form a relatively independent region. But if they stayed here for a long period of time, or even forever, the only choice would be to be scattered and assimilate into the local population. Not only would this be a good thing for Donglan, it would also be a good thing for the Greyblood Elves. And when all of this happened, the Tassel Kingdom, which had existed for more than 1,000 years, would come to an end. All that would remain would be a new species of the Donglan Principality, the Donglan Greyblood Elves. When the long elven migration procession set off, the elves would look back every few steps with expressions of reluctance, as if they were praying for a miracle to suddenly appear, for natural disasters to suddenly disappear, for the dark clouds of war to suddenly disperse. But at this moment that familiar song rang out once again. Djhd, Kasu Ad Asda. Distant relatives, where have you gone? We miss you in our homeland. The Banshee Princess, who had turned into a spectre, sang that familiar traveler's song once again. Back then, when the dark clouds of war covered her homeland, Liusu had hummed this little song in order to find a place for her people to live and reproduce in. She had left her homeland to search for her ideal country by herself. Fredld Cad. Are the ancient trees at home still green? That familiar spring scenery of the lake always reminds me of my childhood. Back then, the sky was so blue. Perhaps this was how Liusu had smiled back then as she bid farewell to her family in her homeland. My beautiful childhood has passed, and the nightmarish war is right before me. But I, little Liusu who loves singing the most, believe that there's a peaceful and beautiful land on the other side of the mountain. Yep, perhaps there isn't such a place on the other side of the mountain, but there's definitely such a place on the other side of the mountain. This feeling was so similar to back then. Even though it was clearly a cheerful song, some of the young elves were already beginning to cry in a low voice, while even more of them were beginning to sing together in a low voice. Finally, the many low voices combined into a chorus that echoed throughout this boundless world. My dear Aunt Susan, I miss you again. But, little Liusu, you still can't go home. I still haven't found the home of my dreams, but I believe that the clover will always hide under the hooves of a horse. The home of my dreams is right under my nose. Her singing had already started to spread. Liusu, who had never been discouraged, walked briskly in that chaotic world. She crossed a mountain, a sea, and arrived at the other side of the mountain, and there, and there, and there, and there, and finally, I've found it. It's right there. The ancient trees in my dreams are guiding me. I'm about to see the beautiful home of my dreams. That's right, she had found it. The hesitation and depression in the song had disappeared, and the cheerful song had reached its climax. Da jdad. Dal data 80. My family, I've finally found the home of my dreams. Our new home is in the north. Our new home is in the north.